Good morning and welcome to our extended coverage of the death of Queen Elizabeth II. We are waking up today as a nation to something that has seemed unthinkable for so long, life without our beloved Queen. Anyone under the age of 70, the vast majority of the people of this country, have never known any other monarch. Her Majesty was a constant in our lives, and her death yesterday afternoon remains the deepest of shocks and leaves us as a nation in mourning.
Yes, and today is also a new dawn for the monarchy. We're waking up to a new king, Charles III. And Britain has a new Queen Consort, Camilla. Well, as the nation comes to terms with the loss, let's take a look back at the Queen's remarkable life.
Born on April the 21st, 1926, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was the first child of the then Duke and Duchess of York. As King Edward's eighth niece, she wasn't destined to rule, but at the age of 10, her uncle abdicated, and the course of her life changed forever as she suddenly became heir to the throne.
We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen. And we are trying too to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war.
It was the start of the Second World War when a teenage Princess Elizabeth began public duties. She joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, which trained her to drive and repair trucks.
By her example, perhaps more than her service, she served her country.
And like thousands of others, she had a sweetheart in the forces. Her third cousin, young naval officer Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten. Shortly after her 21st birthday in 1947, they married at Westminster Abbey.
Elizabeth and Philip waved their thanks to the happy cheers from below.
The following year, she had a son, Prince Charles, and 2 years later, a daughter, Princess Anne. Then, in 1952, while the royal couple were on tour in Kenya, the news came through that Elizabeth's beloved father, King George VI, had died. And at 25, she had become Queen.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service.
Her coronation took place a year later, in 1953. In the 10 years after being crowned, her popularity grew, along with the royal family. First the arrival of Prince Andrew, and then Prince Edward. As a committed head of the Commonwealth, the Queen has visited every nation, often repeatedly. In the 60s, she flew to a remarkable 28 countries in total. The 70s and the 80s were a mix of triumph and turmoil.
A day of tragic violence in Ireland. Lord Mountbatten of Burma has been killed by an explosion on his yacht off the Republic's coast.
Then, in the 1990s, the Queen entered perhaps the most difficult decade of her reign, divorce and devastation.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
But there was worse to come with the death of Princess Diana in 1997. The Queen made an unprecedented live broadcast.
As your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart, first, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being.
5 years later, in 2002, the Queen faced more personal tragedy, losing her sister, Princess Margaret, and then Queen Elizabeth, the Queen's mother, 2 months later. But that summer was also one of celebration, as the Queen marked her Golden Jubilee. A decade later, golden became diamond. 4 days of celebrations ensued to mark the Queen becoming only the second monarch in history to reach such a milestone. On the 9th of September 2015, she became the longest-serving monarch Britain had ever seen, surpassing the reign of her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. The same year, her 5th great-grandchild was born. She now has 12. But in her 90s, the Queen was confronted with a number of crises within the royal family. Her grandson, Prince Harry, and his wife Meghan made a surprise announcement that they no longer wished to be senior royals and were, in effect, quitting the firm, a decision which Her Majesty said she was saddened by.
I will always have the utmost respect for my grandmother, my Commander-in-Chief, and I am incredibly grateful to her and the rest of my family for the support they have shown Meghan and I over the last few months.
Following Harry's departure, the Queen faced another scandal, this time surrounding her son, Prince Andrew, and his relationship with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. The Duke of York was stripped of his titles and sacked of royal duties after settling a civil sexual assault case, paying his accuser what is believed to be a multi-million-pound sum. At the time, Britain was in the midst of an unprecedented global pandemic, and the Queen had been integral in helping steer the nation through, even making a rare special address to the British public during lockdown.
We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
But it was in April 2021 that the Queen was dealt the biggest blow when her husband of nearly 74 years, her strength and stay, the Duke of Edinburgh, died at the age of 99. Ever the dedicated public servant, Queen Elizabeth picked herself up and threw herself back into official duties.
Ah, there you are.
Just 4 days after his death. Her Majesty's own health came under the spotlight when, in October 2021, she spent a night in hospital having precautionary tests. A few months later, she tested positive for COVID and was forced to cancel a string of engagements and appearances. In recent months, worsening mobility problems led to her pulling out of a number of key events, including Remembrance Sunday and the state opening of Parliament. For the first time in 59 years, she missed the speech, having only missed 2 in the past due to pregnancies. And in an historic change of protocol, granted powers to her son and heir, Prince Charles.
Her Majesty looks forward to the celebrations taking place across the United Kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth.
In April 2022, Queen Elizabeth reached the remarkable age of 96. And achieved the major historical milestone of 70 years on the throne, with her Platinum Jubilee marked by celebrations and commemorations up and down the country. But just a few months after those celebrations, health concerns continued when she was forced to cancel a planned appearance at the Brewer Highland Games with her son, Prince Charles. Throughout the course of her 70-year reign, she has missed the event on just a handful of occasions. And another change of tradition came when, for the first time in her reign, Her Majesty welcomed the latest Prime Minister to Balmoral instead of Buckingham Palace. The Queen officially declared Liz Truss the 3rd female leader of the United Kingdom on September the 6th. But the next day was forced to cancel a Privy Council meeting in which she was supposed to officially swear in her cabinet. Doctors told Her Majesty to rest after a full day. Until the end, she continued, when health would allow, to uphold her appearances, often with her family by her side. During her 70-year reign, Queen Elizabeth has carried out more than 30,000 royal engagements, visited 110 countries, seen the rise and fall of 15 prime ministers, met with 13 US presidents, and has become patron of more than 600 charities. She leaves behind 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren. Along with an unrivaled legacy and an unquestionable commitment to her country.
So today, King Charles is expected to travel from Balmoral to London with Camilla ahead of making his first televised address to the nation. The King has already led tributes to Her Majesty. Shortly after the palace announced the death of the Queen yesterday evening, King Charles III released his first statement as monarch. It read, "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know myself her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which Her Majesty the Queen was so widely held." Tributes also for Her Majesty poured in from around the world overnight. Here at home, the nation is united in grief, with mourners gathering outside royal palaces across the country, and many members of the public held a silent vigil outside BP as crowds gathered throughout the night to mourn the Queen. talkTV correspondent Jessica King was outside Buckingham Palace last night and is back again this morning. Jessica, good morning. Describe, if you can, the scene for us there at Buckingham Palace today.
Well, it's quite extraordinary, really, to be here yesterday, last night and today. It's difficult to describe, really, the sort of depth of emotion that people gathered here were feeling. Of course, there were tears, but also there was quite a feeling of celebration to celebrate the monarch's life. And as you can see behind me, there is a wall of flowers slowly gathering outside the gates of Buckingham Palace from mourners all over the world who have come to pay their respects, whether that be in poems, in cards, letters, flowers, teddy bears, T-shirts, football tops, flags. And of course, as you can see, the world's media still here outside Buckingham Palace as this wall of condolence and flowers grows outside this building, synonymous with the monarchy and her reign. Buckingham Palace, what an iconic building, looking really rather spectacular in this early morning light. And I think we're definitely going to see a swell of people coming today to pay their respects. It was hammering down with rain last night, but that didn't stop hundreds, if not thousands, of people gathering here throughout the afternoon. And at 6:30, when we got the official announcement, there was a sort of hush that went over the crowd, only sort of infiltrated with pings of people's iPhones going off with news alerts, people taking photos. It was just a sea of people with phones out in the air trying to capture this historic moment. And as you say, tributes coming in all over the world overnight as people wake up to this news. And I think the tributes are going to grow and grow here at Buckingham Palace today.
Jessica, of course, the sense of shock that we all felt yesterday, despite the Queen's advanced years and despite the news that she'd had to cancel engagements. But people outside Buckingham Palace yesterday, many of them would have been tourists, people going to and from work. What was the sense of shock that people were feeling?
I think they were shocked because, of course, it was only on Tuesday that we saw the Queen up at Balmoral welcoming Liz Truss to ensure that smooth transition of power. And people were sort of remarking on how the Queen looked, obviously sort of poring over those pictures, the last pictures that we saw of the Queen. So I think people were a bit taken aback, to be honest. And yeah, there was definitely a sense of, how could it have been that on Tuesday, you know, we saw her in this most significant of roles in the UK government, this transition of power, and now to be in this situation. And I think it really reflects just how much the Queen meant to so many people, whether they were from the UK, lived locally, or whether they were tourists, that they all came down here to gather. They just wanted to be somewhere where they could just take in the news, be together, hug their friends and relatives, and just be at this place, which, as I say, is so synonymous with the Queen. I mean, if you look at it now, you can just see the tributes just climbing up the gates here. I mean, so many flowers, so many roses. the candles as well, and some of the letters that people have read, just really, really from the heart. We were speaking to a gentleman last night here who was almost close to tears, talking about how much the Queen had influenced his life, influenced the life of his whole family. His father fought in the war. And I think hearing people talk about her just shows you, the depth of feeling for the monarch, the longevity of her reign, and just how much she was loved and respected, not only here, but all over the world.
Jessica, couldn't agree more. We'll talk to you regularly throughout the morning. Just very quickly, I was thinking that the most obvious thing, I think, when you wake up to news of this magnitude is she transcended age, religion, colour, creed, social background. She was the most extraordinary, selfless, hard-working, humble woman. And it's just, isn't it, it's extraordinarily sad.
It is strange how, I used the word shock there earlier, it is strange how something that we talked about her being unwell, obviously as being concerned, age of 96, and yet it still comes as a huge shock the moment when it is confirmed. And that's because she is like a part of the backdrop of our lives. None of us have known any other monarch. No. Her image is on so many of the iconic images of our the stamps. The ER on the post boxes. She's such a backdrop to our lives, and indeed, of course, the most famous woman in the world.
So much to discuss this morning. A measure, though, of just how much Her Majesty was loved was in the huge outpouring of grief across the globe following the announcement of her death. US President Joe Biden has led the international tributes. In New York, the Empire State Building was lit up in purple and silver in her honour. In Brussels, EU flags were flown at half-mast outside the European Commission. And at midnight in Paris, the Eiffel Tower will have its lights turned off. Meanwhile, even the head of MI6, Richard Moore, known as C, said all 15 chiefs of the Secret Intelligence Service had been honoured to serve her.
Let's look at some of this morning's front pages now and how they're paying tribute to Her Majesty. The Sun features a black and white photograph of the Queen and says simply, "We loved you, Ma." On the back is a picture of our new King, Charles III. The Times reflects the Queen's life in service and is wrapped in a special cover dedicated to the monarch. The Daily Mirror thanks the Queen for her service on its front page. And the Daily Telegraph shares a black and white image of the Queen along with one of her famous quotes, "Grief is the price we pay for love." The Daily Mail goes with a picture of the Queen as Princess Elizabeth and the line, "Our hearts are broken." Well, let's get some reaction from our panel right now. We're joined by Talk Radio's Royal Editor, Rupert Bell. We have Talk TV's Royal Editor, Sarah Hewson, and Talk Radio's Political Editor, Peter Cardwell. Good morning to you all. Well, it's an extraordinary day. Let's come to you first, Sarah. There are lots of things that go into motion the moment the monarch dies. There are plans that are made not just for years, but for decades in advance. What is going to be happening in the coming hours and days?
These plans, Julia, as you say, have been carefully choreographed over many years and they have been refined. And today they will finally be signed off by the King. What we do know today is that the King and the Queen Consort will return from Balmoral, where they spent the night. They will return to London. The King will have his first meeting with the new Prime Minister. Extraordinary, isn't it, that in the space of 2 days we have the two most significant and important figures in this country thrust into their new roles. And he will, later on this evening, give an address to the nation, a pre-recorded televised address at 6 o'clock this evening, where he will pay his respects to his mother. We saw that in the written statement last night when he talked about his cherished mother, beloved mother. But he will also pledge his duty to serve the nation. And we will have the House of Commons meeting for MPs to pay their condolences. We will have gun salutes ringing out, one shot fired for every year of the Queen's life. We will have bells ringing, one bell tolling for every year of her life as well. And we will start to see the wheels in motion of that plan, Operation London Bridge, putting into motion now. The Queen will be moved to the ballroom at Balmoral, and members of her household and estate will be able to pay their respects to her over the coming days as well.
There is obviously, I think a lot of people tuning in this morning are wondering, you know, what is the format and what's going to happen. A lot of it is Rupert, at this moment in time, we're as in the dark as other people. Her body, I'm told, will stay in Holyrood House in Edinburgh for 24 hours and then will be transported to London. Is that right?
That, I believe, is what's going to happen. How it's transported is yet to be decided,
Right.
whether it goes by royal train or is flown down. So there are logistical, and probably that's something that the King, and that is something that, you know, when just hearing Sarah say that, you suddenly go, we have a king, and actually it suddenly, it actually just really hit home to me when you refer to that. And know what's happened. But I slightly digress there.
No, you're right. It's just so
it just actually was a moment, it actually brings chills to me, just suddenly thinking, what has happened? We just have now got a whole different mindset of the way we have to think now.
Well, I think it hit me when we heard people gathering outside Buckingham Palace singing God Save the Queen. We will no longer sing that.
No. And so much of the fabric of what we've all known, actually, for 70 years, that we've probably always seen her as this sort of constant feature amongst everything that's gone wrong in the world, be it war, but whatever. She's always been this sort of stoic figure and just an extraordinary woman. We'll find out more about the next few days. I know there's some discussion about the period of mourning and when the funeral will take place and all that. I mean, this has to be signed off by King Charles. And I know there's been some sort of discussion about 10 days, but we can't be specific at the moment. We'll obviously relate that as and when we get it. If I can bring in Peter Cardwell, politically, Sarah made the point, an extraordinary 48 hours. We go from having a Queen and Boris Johnson to having a brand new Prime Minister and a King.
Well, it's fascinating you mention that, Jeremy, and actually you've got to go back, believe it or not, nearly 200 years to 1830, to the last time within a year, never mind a week, that the monarch and the Prime Minister changed. It was actually when William IV took over from George IV, and then later that year, after a general election in November, we had Earl Grey taking over from the Duke of Wellington. So nearly 200 years ago that happened in a year, never mind a week. And we have the Queen in one of her last duties, look, that beautiful, iconic picture, looking like the grandmother of the nation, and welcoming Liz Truss, her 15th Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, interestingly, actually, I think it was still the Second Reform Act, a government used to fall automatically.
That's right, there was automatically a general election.
I mean, this is the interesting thing. The first sign that things were... there was a worry about the Queen's health came actually during the energy statement from Liz Truss. This big set piece, a huge big announcement.
Well, you were watching it as well,
which
Julia.
extraordinarily doesn't even make, you know, the first 10 pages of any of the newspapers. It was a huge big announcement to help people with their energy bills, because this, of course, has taken over. But the first sign we had of this was when notes were being passed, and it was Nadeem Sahawi who came into the Commons.
He rushed out of the House of Commons, and also his opposite number, Angela Rayner, not just the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, but also his opposite number as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and their constitutional rules around that. She was passing notes rushed around. It was interesting because you, like me, Julia, were watching that. Probably the most dramatic policy and most significant policy affecting everybody in the UK, perhaps, that Liz Truss will announce. Obviously and totally understandably, completely overshadowed by the news that the Queen was unwell.
It reminded me of that picture of George W. Bush with the person whispering in his ear when 9/11 happened.
Exactly, my thoughts.
I think I just want to bring it to Liz Truss. I thought the speech outside Number 10 was really dignified and very respectful, and a huge responsibility for her. When we talk about King Charles and what will happen, the government will be fully involved in this, is that right?
That's right, and it's interesting because Liz Truss, as Sarah said, will meet King Charles today. And, of course, that it's a family's grief, but it's also the constitution of this country, the fabric of this country. And it's a big test for Liz Truss, and it's a test I think she passed yesterday. She spoke for the nation. She spoke for us all in Downing Street just a few hours into her time as Prime Minister.
I think what's quite shocking for a lot of people, though, is that the statement from Buckingham Palace, that when it did come out at 12:32 is when we first found out that there was concern about the Queen's health, was that the statement came from King Charles III himself, and that swift movement forward. The Queen is dead. You know, God save the King. That I think for a lot of people can actually feel quite upsetting.
And I noticed that the Kensington Royal, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's social media account, instantly changed to the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge.
It'll change again, don't you?
It will, because the title reverts to the Crown, the Prince and Princess of Wales. Those titles are not automatically handed down. But once Prince Charles once the proclamation has happened, after that process, he can then bestow those titles.
I've always wondered, and it happened with the Queen, of course. She was at Treetops in Kenya when her late father died. Why does it take, Rupert, so long for the coronation? Is it, if all of these plans, and apparently they were, as you said, changed and practised for years.
Well, and of course they didn't know where she was going to die, so it's multiple plans in place.
Why does it take so long for the coronation? When do we imagine that will be?
Well, the last one, can be 6 months. It just really depends on the logistics of what they want to do and bringing everything together, because it's a huge occasion. Back in the 50s, remember, it was almost used as a way of bringing the country out of the Second World War. It was a huge moment. And so there was a lot going into it. Now it's a different era, different time, so presumably, logistically, it could take, but it will be something that, in a way, the King will decide and they will work out a strategy.
But there's a point of moving from a nation in mourning to celebrating a new monarch. And, of course, there is a lot more controversy surrounding Prince Charles. And we know that, now King Charles, than there has ever been surrounding the Queen. I mean, you can think of no example where the Queen has put a foot wrong. If the worst thing she did in her reign was people's public perception of her and the death following the death of Diana. In 70 years, that is an extraordinary legacy to leave.
I think she's not only been a beacon for us all, I don't think there will ever be a reign like it. And I've said for many, many years that I think once she passed, the world, the country, the whole world will look and go, an unbelievable woman. And it was all about service. And I read an amazing quote for her yesterday that said that we all just pass through. We come onto the earth and we experience stuff and we pass through.
It is just extraordinary the way that she... That picture defined her life on Tuesday, without question, because it showed her unwavering commitment. Even though physically she was clearly very frail, it was almost like, I will do this because this is what I'm here to do on behalf of my country. And it was almost like she was determined to do it. And then she made it, and then she's looking magnificent, smiling, happy. Look, it probably didn't last very long, but she was there, and her last overriding memory is her smiling, greeting her latest Prime Minister.
15 of them.
15, but actually you know that when she started out her life as a young girl, she was never expecting to be Queen. The events in the late 30s changed and transformed her life, and that suddenly finds her thrust in, living through the Second World War, and then from 1952, never blinking, just knowing my sole purpose, and that is what she brought.
That's what she made at the age of 21.
Sorry, just...
Yes, when she said, my whole life, whether it be long or short, will be devoted to your service.
And service right until the end. And I think it will give great comfort to the family and also to the nation that final image we had of her was one that she looked quite so radiant.
I also think it was lovely as well that we all got to celebrate the Jubilee this year, the 70 years. I think, I mean, you talk about timing and stuff, but that was good as well.
Yeah, people are going to say that. But I think what's also very crucial, as Rupert said, she's clearly was close to the end of her life, now we know, and we know that she's had mobility difficulties, and as often is the case, Buckingham Palace very much underplays the health, and she's very much, don't make a fuss, no drama, very stoic figure, of course, through our lives, and then we often learn later there's been difficulty. But it's very interesting that she did not want to be seen with a cane. She never wanted to be seen in a wheelchair. She wanted to be seen as this incredibly strong figure representing the nation, the grandmother of the nation, and I think it's a lot about her pride.
Pride she was a proud person, and dignity and leadership, and the fact that she was someone who embodied the nation, actually, embodied the spirit of what it is to be British.
When I said transcends, I really believe that, and I think that we all know, and now is not the time to talk about it, we all know that this country, this nation, this world is going through some really difficult times, but I think it's really interesting that we will unite as a country, and that there should perhaps be a message in that. Also, just very quickly, did you see the rainbows come out over?
I took a picture of it, actually,
Just
from our building. As you know, Jeremy has got 17 floors. I was on the top floor and I took a beautiful picture of the rainbow, and a double rainbow at parts of London, actually,
on screen
as well.
now is extraordinary. We live in
So
Windsor,
beautiful.
and it came out, and you just think, you know. Thank you for now, guys. Thank you very much indeed. As we've said, throughout this morning, we will be bringing you reaction to the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, keeping you informed of what's happening over the next hours and days. But right now, let's get the latest news headlines from our news team.
The nation is waking up in mourning following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace announced that Britain's beloved longest-reigning monarch died peacefully yesterday afternoon at her Scottish estate Balmoral, with her family by her side. King Charles III, who became the new monarch immediately, said his mother's death was a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. He and his wife Camilla, now the Queen Consort, are believed to have spent the night at Balmoral, but they're expected to travel back to London today, ready for King Charles's first audience with the new Prime Minister and his first address to the nation. At midday, bells are expected to toll at St Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, with a gun salute set to be fired at Hyde Park. And Parliament will hold a special sitting where MPs will share their tributes to the Queen, and the government will confirm the length of national mourning, which is likely to be 12 to 13 days, up to the day after the Queen's funeral. The British public and the royal family will now come together to remember the monarch and give thanks for her 70-year reign. Within hours of the announcement last night, crowds began to gather and lay floral tributes at the gates of Balmoral. Windsor, the Queen's formal official residence, and outside Buckingham Palace. Where people could be heard singing "God Save the Queen." Prime Minister Liz Truss, who was appointed by the Queen on Tuesday, described her as the rock upon which modern Britain was built. And worldwide, tributes have poured in for the Queen, who was head of state of the UK and 14 other countries, including Canada, Jamaica and New Zealand. Their Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, said that she was extraordinary.
The last days of the Queen's life captures who she was in so many ways, working till the very end on behalf of the people she loved.
Whilst the President of the United States, Joe Biden, signed a book of condolence at the British Embassy in Washington, where he paid tribute.
I had the opportunity to meet her before she passed, and she was an incredibly gracious and decent woman. And the thoughts and prayers of the American people are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief.
In America, landmarks were lit up purple in the Queen's honour. While in Paris, the Eiffel Tower's iconic lights went dark in her memory. And now back to Jeremy and Julia in the studio.
It's emerged this morning that the Queen died at her beloved Balmoral yesterday afternoon with just Charles and Princess Anne at her bedside. Other members of the royal family, including Princes William, Harry, Andrew and Edward, dashed to Scotland but sadly did not make it in time. Joining us live outside Balmoral is talkTV correspondent Oliver Whitfield-Mierlich. I hope I got that right. Oliver, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Yes, it's a continuation of the weather that we've seen over the past few days, Jeremy.
In terms of what we know at this point, Oliver, there are, of course, procedures, protocols. We talked already with the panel this morning. King Charles heading to London today with the Queen Consort. There seems to be some sort of debate about timing. What we do know, I believe, is that Her Majesty's body will be moved to Holyrood House. Is that right today?
Again, the timings we've yet to have confirmed. There's various speculation across various media titles whether that will be taking place today or whether, in fact, Queen Elizabeth II's body will remain here at Balmoral Castle so that the household staff and family members can continue to pay their respects. There is potentially a date being touted around Saturday or Sunday for the body then to be moved to Edinburgh, where it will go to Holyrood House, the smallest of the Queen's castles. There again, people will be able to pay respects before it is moved to a church in central Edinburgh, and then potentially onto the royal train, which would be waiting at Waverley Station. That would then make its way down the East Coast Main Line, where people are expected to gather in their thousands at overhead bridges, at level crossings, at station platforms. And an interesting fact about this operation, detailed right down to the minute, is that it's expected people would be throwing flowers, would be sending their good wishes, and because of the amount of flowers that would be thrown onto the track and onto the royal train, a second train would have to follow behind to make sure that all of that debris could be cleared up. But as those timings are unconfirmed at the moment, we're going to have to wait and see what Buckingham Palace has to say. We do know, however, as you mentioned, that King Charles III and his wife, Camilla, the Queen Consort, will be heading down to London today. They'll then hold a meeting with the Prime Minister, and then that address to the nation later on, expected around 6 p.m.
Indeed, Oliver, these plans for what happens when the Queen dies, they are in place for many years. They are rehearsed. Operation London Bridge is what we've all heard about and read about in the media. But actually, with the Queen losing her life at Balmoral, her beloved favourite home, we understand, Operation Unicorn is what's come into place. And that brings into play Holyrood House and the Queen's body being taken to London. But it's extraordinary how much is still up in the air and unknown at this point. When do we think we'll get it all confirmed? How long the body will be lying in state in Westminster Hall, as we expect? So many hundreds of thousands, millions of people will want a chance to pay their respects, as was it 200,000 did for the Queen Mother?
Yeah, and we are getting in touch with Buckingham Palace, trying to ascertain those details. But I think what the authorities will want to say is that this takes a lot of planning. And, as you say, because she's died up here in Scotland, it adds in an additional layer of complexity. It means that potentially we might see the plans extended over a few more days. There has been a meeting which was held last night. That brought together people from central government, the police, the armed forces. There is a lot of planning that has to go into this. Remember, the United Kingdom is great at pomp, great at ceremony, something which Her Majesty used to love. And so they will be wanting to get this 100% right, because the eyes of the world really are on the UK at the moment. International headlines, this is leading news bulletins right across the globe. And so the last thing that they will want to do is to put on a show that isn't 100% correct and 100% befitting of the United Kingdom's longest reigning monarch.
Sorry, Judith. Thank you, Oliver. More from Oliver outside Balmoral. And I have to say, I think the point he makes is a very salient one. There will be additional layers. The reason that we are saying already this morning that that period of mourning, it's supposed to be 10 days, because of the Scottish angle here, it could be longer. In fact, there's conversations this morning that Her Majesty's body might not come on the royal train. It might be flown. All of this is to be discussed, and we believe that will be discussed primarily when the new King, Charles III, arrives in London with the Queen Consort today, meets with the Ascension and decides what's happening. I'm delighted to be joined now by a man who served actually with my father, I have to say, for Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and was one of the few people outside the royal family to get to know her well. Major Colin Burgess, former equerry to the Queen Mother. Good morning, Colin.
Good morning.
We were just talking about our shared experiences. My father and you worked together many years at Clarence House. Very, very sad morning.
Really sad, I think clearly there's the international profile of the Queen. I think the thing that we shouldn't forget is the sort of deep sense of duty, but also humour and human factor with the Queen. She loved Scotland, she loved people, and had a deep sense of humour.
Well, we saw really recently, didn't we, with that wonderful little skit with Paddington Bear, and we finally find out what she kept in her handbag, and it turned out to be a marmalade sandwich. much.
Absolutely, and I don't think anyone can forget the parachuting into the Olympics.
Absolutely iconic.
Just awesome. And you know, there are a ton of stories of people meeting the Queen, you know, and not recognising her. You know, there's lots of stories.
Isn't that a great story about her in a shop in Sandringham or Balmoral or something? And the woman said, popped out to buy a cake, and the woman said, "Can I just say, you look remarkably like the Queen?" She said, "Well, that's reassuring."
And one in Scotland as well, which I'm sure you know, Colin, as well, where she was out walking wearing her headscarf, and some American tourists saw her and said, "How long have you lived here?" And she said, "Well, I've been coming for 80 years. And they said, "Oh, well, you must have met the Queen then." She said, "No, but he has," pointing to her bodyguard.
And they know what's wonderful is they don't ask the Queen to take the photograph of them with the Queen's bodyguard. And she said afterwards, "I can't wait for them to get home and find out."
Absolutely, and you know, she trained as a mechanic, of course, in the war, and drove her own Land Rovers around Balmoral, and so it was quite adamant that she would drive herself everywhere. In fact, she had Land Rover made for her. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but Land Rover, I'm going to say it anyway, Land Rover made a special version of Land Rover for her, which didn't have the alarm on the seatbelt, so she could drive around the estate without the seatbelt.
That's the Queen.
It's interesting, you remember Prince Philip's funeral and that amazing Land Rover that he had made. He specifically designed for his own coffee. You obviously, in your time with the Queen Mother, will have met the Queen. And a lot of people this morning and over the next few days will talk about her as a person, as a mother, as this beacon. What do you think made her so, we're going to use the word iconic, special to almost everybody she ever met?
Connection, emotional connection. She had the most amazing ability to make anyone feel at ease, and I think that's, in fact, that runs through the family really. And the Queen Mother was exceptional at making people feel at ease. The Queen, Her Majesty, was absolutely amazing. You know, she saw someone in a broken down car in Balmoral, again with her headscarf on, and said, "Oh, do you need a hand fixing that?"
And she could have done. Could you imagine telling that story today? The Queen once mended my car.
And probably could have. You know, this is the thing. Wonderful, wonderful sense of humour.
But we've only got to see that, I think, in recent years. She was a very reserved figure for so many years, and of course, she was the first monarch who had, her coronation and weddings and things televised, and then those documentaries. I think it was Prince Philip that was more keen on these things happening, where we got to see behind the scenes. But what I'd like to hear from you is, we're talking about a woman who we, even if we've never met her, feel that we know, because she's the backdrop to our lives, to our nation. No one in this country could not know who she is, in the world could not know who she is. But we don't know her personally. For those who know her personally, for the family relationships and the relationships within the royal households, how would you think she will be remembered, as opposed to the public face that we see of her? Behind the scenes, how will she be remembered?
Very kind, very loving, devoted, not only to the country but to the family.
Gang.
An amazing, absolutely, an amazing sense of belonging, just making sure that everyone felt, included. Obviously, deeply missed by the nation. And as you say, it's very easy to feel that you kind of know someone when you've sort of seen someone on TV, or you get to feel that you sort of know them. But the reality actually was the Queen. She showed that sort of human, that warmth everywhere.
And her love of animals, of course. I mean, Rupert, you're not only, of course, our royal correspondent, you also cover racing for our sister station talkSPORT. And I know that you've come across the Queen on many an occasion.
His brother trained.
Exactly. Right, I mean, let's face it, she loves horses and dogs more than us lot.
Well, he had a runner for her yesterday. Sadly, it didn't win, but I know how much he enjoyed ringing her and talking, just shooting the breeze. I mean, it was as simple as that, because all the royal trainers are allowed to sort of ring. They get given a number, and it's almost like, well, at the end of the day, here's a hotline through wherever you are. You could ring her.
So heads of state around the world.
But racehorse trainers and racehorse trainers.
Michael Bell straight through, Obama not so sure.
Yeah, basically that would be about it. So Michael Stipe might have got first dibs. The man who trained.
What did your brother Michael say about her? Interestingly, what Colin was saying as a person, Rupert, that sort of human touch that transcended everything.
It made him laugh, vice versa, and that's what she liked. If you made her laugh, she was happy. She didn't want you to be all sort of fawning and sort of over-respectful. Just treat her as a human being.
And yet we didn't see so much of that until recent years, when we saw her, parachuting into the Olympic Games opening ceremony with James Bond. When did that change, where she became a less austere figure?
After the death of the Queen Mother, I think.
I'm really strong on this, actually, as a fervent royalist. I think she moved with the times. One of the things that the old man always said to me, and we've talked about this, is that the mystique of the royal family has gone, and the Queen was the epitome of mystique. We live in a different world now. Who would have thought the royal family would be on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, and it's about information. Yesterday, the palace releasing that information about her being ill was almost a first, probably to avoid the online stuff that would have come out. But she sort of embraced it. But there was also, in the older days, much more of a mystique, wasn't there?
But even with the embracing, there was still a level of mystique. I mean, look at the Paddington sketch and the
Apparently
Olympics.
the family didn't even know she did.
It wasn't a send-up, and it was not at no stage were you sort of laughing at the Queen. It was a cool kind of, wow, look at that sort of moment. I remember years ago in Clarence House, what was referred to as the green room, which was the garden, having lunch with the Queen Mother, and asked her, in error really, about if she watched the Dimbleby interview with the Prince of Wales, and she sort of looked back and said, some things are best not spoken about, and that was a sort of double-edged.
This is the interesting thing in terms of what she has weathered, and that's one of the reasons probably why she has weathered things. This whole never complain, never explain, that has been the mantra. We've seen a very different attitude from some of the younger royals today, perhaps not the day to go into that. But she has weathered all these storms. When we think about her annus horribilis, Diana and Charles breaking up, Windsor Castle on fire, later Diana's death, and all the things that have happened since, is that actually there's never been a scandal about her. There has never been any questioning of her duty to the nation, of her doing her job, her turning up to her job during lockdown. I thought it was absolutely extraordinary. She was so keen to be on our TV screens. We were discussing on Piers Morgan's show last night. And all of us had exactly the same effect, which is goosebumps every time we hear those amazing words when she said, we will see our family again, our friends again, we will meet again. And it brings tears to people's eyes.
Absolutely. How much she absolutely knew what was required. And this is the thing that the family have. This is the thing that the Queen Mother had. This is the thing that the Queen has. And this thing that King Charles III has, which is an amazing ability to say and do the right thing at the right time.
I think that's the point about her. I mean, as you quite rightly say, there will be discussions further down the line about the monarchy. He wants to slim it down, all of that. She just seemed, Sarah, to get it right the whole time. Do you know what I mean?
She got it right. We needed her at that point in the coronavirus pandemic. Everyone was very frightened.
Yeah.
Who did we turn to? We turned to the Queen to give that speech, we will meet again. She also knew that she had to be seen to be believed. And while she was in HMS Bubble at Windsor Castle, isolating, she adapted and adopted new technologies, and we started to see the Queen appearing on Zoom. So, although at that point we may not have seen so much of her, and in the recent months, over the course of the last year, when her mobility issues have kept her at home, instead of those big public appearances, the walkabouts, for example, she did manage to appear, and in some ways we actually got more of an insight.
Well, I think it's very interesting, because that mystique you talk about, and that stiff upper lip and not wanting to show any weakness. I thought one of the greatest images was the Chelsea Flower Show in the golf cart, just sat there being driven around. I mean, who'd have thought that would have ever happened?
Well, Her mother used to go round in a golf cart.
Well, we know that, yes, round the green room, round the garden.
Well, I don't know about that, but I remember seeing the Queen Mother going round in the Royal Golf Cart at Royal Ascot. So, but it was a souped-up one that she had at Chelsea.
I know, she asked me to go faster. It was me driving it. So,
right, well, I remember that going round. I remember that, but in seeing the Queen at Chelsea doing that, but that was the way because it was something that had happened before, and you remember the pictures of the Queen Mother, that when she was in her wheelchair, that was something that left such a mark on the Queen, saying, that will not happen to me, you will not see me in that situation.
It's really interesting, isn't it, team, that sort of, the way that they were, the monarchy, and then embracing how it changed. She even managed, I think, you've just touched upon the thing that apparently did upset her, seeing her mother in the wheelchair and that image. She even managed to get that right. She managed to somehow move from this all-encompassing lady to a grandmother, the grandmother, as I say, even in that golf cart. Even with the cane, even that, I mean, everybody will remember. I was thinking about this morning. You know, people say, where were you when? We'll all remember where we were when we heard about the Queen yesterday, but I suspect that 99% of the world will remember that picture of her holding onto a cane and welcoming her 15th Prime Minister. And that, as you said earlier, just summed up what her idea of duty was.
Clearly been so crucial to her, wasn't it? That to do the job that she is there to do. Can I ask also about the effect of the loss of Prince Philip? There was no doubt at all. This was, I mean, this was her childhood crush. She met him as a girl and was clearly fell mad in this wonderfully dashing military man. And she married the love of her life. And yes, like all marriages, we're sure, and we've all watched The Crown. There may have been trials and tribulations, but clearly a great loss. And that iconic image of her sitting alone in the Abbey, wearing that mask, the stoicism, especially with all the Partygate affairs since, how much that showed that contrast in terms of her sense of duty. How big an effect do you think it will have had on her, her health and just you know, her, I suppose, her willingness, her ability to go on and do a duty, to lose the rock, as she always referred to him?
And anyone who loses their partner of that long is going to have a massive impact on you, of course. But as I say, there is a sense of there's a strand of duty that runs through the family, which is so pervasive with the family, and it's absolutely incredible, the sense of duty that exists with that family.
The show must go on.
The show must go on.
And so, now with King Charles.
Well, absolutely.
This is actually true, and I think you know, there'll be national and official and worldwide mourning, and you can take into consideration, of course, it's a family member. They've lost their mother, their grandmother, their great-grandmother, but that sense of duty and continuity in this constitutional monarchy, that will kick in from today, won't it?
Even from yesterday.
God save the Queen, long live the King.
Absolutely.
That tells us everything we need to know. But I think you were talking, Julie, about that image of her with the cane by the fire in Balmoral, and I think for that to be the final image is very special, but also for Balmoral to have been her final resting place, because it was, in fact, where she and Prince Philip got engaged. He was invited to join them during the summer, join her family during that summer, and that is where they discussed and then got engaged.
And maybe that's why she wanted to spend the summer there in particular.
It was a place that was huge.
Can I also ask about King Charles III? There'd been a lot of talk that he would not take the name Charles on the throne because, of course, what happened to Charles I and Charles II, and it has been quite normal over the centuries for a king to take a different name. I mean, rather difficult when someone takes the throne at the age of 73. But were you surprised that he wants to be known as King Charles III?
No, I think in recent years it has become apparent that that was the most likely, and it reminded me of when the Queen first found out about the death of her father, and her private secretary said, "And what would you like to be called, Your Majesty?" And she said, "How would you like to be known?" She said, "By my name, of course, Elizabeth." And I think for Charles, who has been the longest-serving heir apparent, to change his name now would have
I think it would
been
be
quite extraordinary. We are all ready to call him King Charles. And
we talk about him. I was thinking again this morning on the way in. My son's 2.5. We've all known one monarch. He's potentially going to know 3 in his lifetime. Times are changing immeasurably. You can't get over the fact that this woman this amazing woman was in our lives for all of our lives.
I looked through the list of kings, and you go the average age. I mean, King Charles is now the oldest person to ascend to the throne in his 70s. I think Edward VII was the previous oldest at 60, and he reigned for 10 years. So for Charles, this is such a, you know, a seismic moment in his own life, and he's got to prepare. But the point I'd also, you know, the Queen dying at 96, this is, and I think the family would want this to be a celebration, because it's a life long-lived and brilliantly lived. And they don't want, you know, it's not in a sense, the Queen wouldn't want people to say, feel sorry for her, because she knows she's lived.
Rupert, that's a really good point, and I think it's something that I think we should really embrace. I think the Queen would you know, would welcome, would expect people to celebrate her life rather than, you know, obviously we have the mourning to go through, of course.
But it'd be all that sort of, wouldn't it? Come on, done now, go move on, carry on. It would be
carry on, not cancelling every single thing.
You know, the Queen had such a wry sense of humour. Once at Sandringham, Princess Margaret accidentally got her hair caught on fire. She was leaning over a candle. And the Queen just looked up very casually and said, "Oh, look, Margot's on fire."
Again.
And you know, and everyone said then that she was patted out. But this is the wonderful thing about the Queen. It's just wry sense of humour, but a sense of duty and just doing the right thing and being there.
And leaving her legacy as well. Again, how she established during the Platinum Jubilee, when all eyes were on her, that the crown will go on to King Charles and his Queen consort, Camilla.
Do you know what's really interesting when you talk about legacy? I think so many people, I don't know if you guys would agree, they say, I'm going to try and create a legacy. She didn't try anything. It was just the way she was. And to sum up her life, she touched everybody.
She was not interested in the spotlight. Actually, she would have been far happier as a
Balmoral.
country woman with her horses and dogs.
Yep.
But she rose to that challenge, that unexpected challenge that
At
was
25.
thrust upon her.
Yeah.
And apparently effortlessly. Look at all of the, especially in the last. Look at the last few years of how she engaged with the media, and arguably, you know, had an enviable relationship with the media. I mean, if you look at the mistakes that have been made over the years, you know, various members of the royal family, the Queen acted faultlessly with the media, with any interactions, with any interviews, with any appearances. It was all done beautifully, perfectly, you know, very composed. And you know,
and never complaining,
and
never explain, never complain. That was the mantra.
But look, you know, it's you know, I think as the oldest member of the royal family, you know, I think there are a lot of the younger members of the royal family who can you know, take note.
Amen to that.
So much to discuss, and if you're just waking up and tuning in, of course, that's sad news. Queen Elizabeth II yesterday dying, and so much will be talked about over the next few hours and days as we gather together what's going to happen with mourning. Here on Talk Breakfast, we'll talk a lot more in the next 3 hours, but right now, let's get the latest news headlines from our news team.
Good morning, I'm Zora Suleiman. The nation is waking up in mourning following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace announced that Britain's beloved longest-reigning monarch died peacefully yesterday afternoon at her Scottish estate, Balmoral, with her family by her side. King Charles III, who became the new monarch immediately, said his mother's death was a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. He and his wife Camilla, now the Queen Consort, are believed to have spent the night at Balmoral, but they're expected to travel back to London today, ready for King Charles's first audience with the new Prime Minister and his first address to the nation. At midday, bells are expected to toll at St Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, with gun salutes set to be fired at Hyde Park and at the Tower of London. Parliament will also start 2 days of special tributes, and the government will confirm the length of national mourning, which is likely to be 12 to 13 days, up to the day after the Queen's funeral. The British public and the royal family will now come together to remember the monarch and give thanks to her 70-year reign. Within hours of the announcement last night, crowds began to gather and lay floral tributes at the gates of Buckingham Palace, where people could be heard singing "God Save the Queen." They also gathered at Windsor, the Queen's former official residence, and at Sandringham, where crowds paid tribute.
Gutted. I think she's a remarkable woman. I think she's done the royal family proud. And yeah, just, as a role model as well, absolutely fantastic. I don't think there'll be anyone like her again.
I just feel sad that the Queen's dead and just
sad, mate, aren't you?
Yeah.
End of an era, yes, definitely. She's all I've ever known, and all of us, won't it be, that we've only ever known the Queen here.
And worldwide tributes have poured in for the Queen, who was head of state of the UK and 14 other countries, including Canada, Jamaica and New Zealand. Their Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, said that she was extraordinary.
The last days of the Queen's life captures who she was in so many ways, working till the very end on behalf of the people she loved.
Whilst the President of the United States, Joe Biden, signed a book of condolence at the British Embassy in Washington, where he paid tribute. And now back to Jeremy and Julia in the studio.
Good morning and welcome to our extended coverage of the death of Queen Elizabeth II yesterday. We are waking up this morning to something that has seemed unthinkable for so long. Life without our beloved Queen. Now, anyone under the age of 70, and that is the vast majority of the people of this country, have never known any other monarch. Her Majesty was a constant in our lives, and her death yesterday afternoon remains a deep shock and leaves us as a nation in mourning.
Yes, and today it's also a new dawn for the monarchy. We're waking up to a new king, Charles III. And Britain also has a new Queen consort, Camilla. As the nation comes to terms with the loss, let's take a look back at the Queen's remarkable life.
Born on April the 21st, 1926, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was the first child of the then Duke and Duchess of York. As King Edward's 8th niece, she wasn't destined to rule, but at the age of 10, her uncle abdicated, and the course of her life changed forever as she suddenly became heir to the throne.
We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen. And we are trying too to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war.
It was the start of the Second World War when a teenage Princess Elizabeth began public duties. She joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, which trained her to drive and repair trucks.
By her example, perhaps more than her service, she served her country.
And like thousands of others, she had a sweetheart in the forces. Her third cousin, young naval officer Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten. Shortly after her 21st birthday in 1947, they married at Westminster Abbey.
Elizabeth and Philip waved their thanks to the happy cheers from below.
The following year, she had a son, Prince Charles, and 2 years later, a daughter, Princess Anne. Then, in 1952, while the royal couple were on tour in Kenya, the news came through that Elizabeth's beloved father, King George VI, had died. And at 25, she had become Queen.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service.
Her coronation took place a year later, in 1953. In the 10 years after being crowned, her popularity grew, along with the royal family. First the arrival of Prince Andrew, and then Prince Edward. As a committed head of the Commonwealth, the Queen has visited every nation, often repeatedly. In the 60s, she flew to a remarkable 28 countries in total. The 70s and the 80s were a mix of triumph and turmoil.
A day of tragic violence in Ireland. Lord Mountbatten of Brewer has been killed by an explosion on his yacht off the Republic's coast.
Then, in the 1990s, the Queen entered perhaps the most difficult decade of her reign, divorce and devastation.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure.
In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
But there was worse to come with the death of Princess Diana in 1997. The Queen made an unprecedented live broadcast.
As your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart, first, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being.
5 years later, in 2002, the Queen faced more personal tragedy, losing her sister, Princess Margaret, and then Queen Elizabeth, the Queen's mother, 2 months later. But that summer was also one of celebration, as the Queen marked her Golden Jubilee. A decade later, golden became diamond. 4 days of celebrations ensued to mark the Queen becoming only the second monarch in history to reach such a milestone. On the 9th of September 2015, she became the longest-serving monarch Britain had ever seen, surpassing the reign of her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. The same year, her 5th great-grandchild was born. She now has 12. But in her 90s, the Queen was confronted with a number of crises within the royal family. Her grandson, Prince Harry, and his wife Meghan made a surprise announcement that they no longer wished to be senior royals and were, in effect, quitting the firm, a decision which Her Majesty said she was saddened by.
I will always have the utmost respect for my grandmother, my Commander-in-Chief, and I am incredibly grateful to her and the rest of my family for the support they have shown Meghan and I over the last few months.
Following Harry's departure, the Queen faced another scandal, this time surrounding her son, Prince Andrew, and his relationship with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. The Duke of York was stripped of his titles and sacked of royal duties after settling a civil sexual assault case, paying his accuser what is believed to be a multi-million-pound sum. At the time, Britain was in the midst of an unprecedented global pandemic, and the Queen had been integral in helping steer the nation through, even making a rare special address to the British public during lockdown.
We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
But it was in April 2021 that the Queen was dealt the biggest blow when her husband of nearly 74 years, her strength and stay, the Duke of Edinburgh, died at the age of 99. Ever the dedicated public servant, Queen Elizabeth picked herself up and threw herself back into official duties.
Ah, there you are.
Just 4 days after his death. Her Majesty's own health came under the spotlight when, in October 2021, she spent a night in hospital having precautionary tests. A few months later, she tested positive for COVID and was forced to cancel a string of engagements and appearances. In recent months, worsening mobility problems led to her pulling out of a number of key events, including Remembrance Sunday and the state opening of Parliament. For the first time in 59 years, she missed the speech, having only missed 2 in the past due to pregnancies. And in an historic change of protocol, granted powers to her son and heir, Prince Charles.
Her Majesty looks forward to the celebrations taking place across the United Kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth.
In April 2022, Queen Elizabeth reached the remarkable age of 96 and achieved the major historical milestone of 70 years on the throne, with her Platinum Jubilee marked by celebrations and commemorations up and down the country. But just a few months after those celebrations, health concerns continued when she was forced to cancel a planned appearance at the Brewer Highland Games with her son, Prince Charles. Throughout the course of her 70-year reign, she has missed the event on just a handful of occasions. And another change of tradition came when, for the first time in her reign, Her Majesty welcomed the latest Prime Minister to Balmoral instead of Buckingham Palace. The Queen officially declared Liz Truss the third female leader of the United Kingdom on September the 6th. But the next day was forced to cancel a Privy Council meeting in which she was supposed to officially swear in her cabinet. Doctors told Her Majesty to rest after a full day. Until the end, she continued, when health would allow, to uphold her appearances, often with her family by her side. During her 70-year reign, Queen Elizabeth has carried out more than 30,000 royal engagements, visited 110 countries, seen the rise and fall of 15 prime ministers, met with 13 US presidents, and has become patron of more than 600 charities. She leaves behind 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren, along with an unrivaled legacy and an unquestionable commitment to her country.
Today, King Charles is expected to travel from Balmoral to London to make his first televised address to the nation, expected to be broadcast at around 6 p.m. this evening. Now, the King has led tributes to Her Majesty shortly after the palace announced the death of Elizabeth yesterday. King Charles released his first statement as monarch. It read, "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." He continued, "During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held." Now, it's emerged this morning that the Queen died at her beloved Balmoral yesterday afternoon at around 4:30 p.m, with just Charles and Princess Anne at her bedside. Other members of the royal family, including the Princes William, Harry, Andrew and Edward, had dashed to Scotland, but sadly did not make it in time. Oliver, our correspondent, is still live outside Balmoral. Oliver, the latest is an obvious question. I've said all morning, and so has Julia, that we really... this is an ongoing thing as to what's going to happen. This changed because the Queen passed in Scotland, and what will happen over the next few days will no doubt become apparent very soon. But what do we know at, 7:10 so far this morning?
So what we do know is that King Charles will travel down to London with his wife Camilla, who is now Queen Consort. There he is expected to meet with Prime Minister Liz Truss, and then we are expecting potentially some more of the details for the coming potentially between 10 and 13 days of mourning and commemorations as the nation pays tribute to the country's longest lived and also longest reigning monarch. Then at around 6 p.m. this evening, the King is expected to make his first nationwide televised address in his new role as the country's sovereign. As of yet, though, the timings and the dates for this huge operation for bringing Her Majesty's body back down to London, for how many days she will potentially lie in state here in Scotland, which would take place in Edinburgh, all of those details we have yet to have full official confirmation from Buckingham Palace, but we are expecting those to come in the days ahead, potentially even later on today. As you mentioned, because she's died here at Balmoral, it adds an extra layer of complexity to the arrangements that had already been laid down and practiced for very many years. It means that, for example, she may spend an extra day here at Balmoral so that the household staff and the family who are gathered here can pay their final respects once more. So everything at the moment is a little bit fluid until we do get those confirmations. But in the last few minutes, and I think this is rather interesting, we've had more of these pedestrian barriers put in here at Balmoral. And I think that's because we are expecting, as we saw at Buckingham Palace, large crowds to gather here. There is already floral tributes being left at the gates of the Balmoral estate. And I think that is only expected to grow. You know, up until about 11 o'clock last night, we had dozens of people arriving every 5 minutes or so. And I think today, now that the nation has come to terms with what has happened, certainly from the wider Aberdeenshire region, we're expecting to have a lot of people down here at Balmoral.
Oliver, thank you very much indeed there. That's Oliver Whitford-Beerchich live from Balmoral for us there. Well, tributes for Her Majesty poured in from around the world overnight. And here at home, the nation has been united in grief, with mourners gathering, as many would have expected, outside royal palaces across the country. Many members of the public held a silent vigil last night outside Buckingham Palace as crowds gathered throughout the night to mourn the Queen. Well, talkTV's correspondent Jessica King was outside Buckingham Palace last night and is back again there this morning. Jessica, describe for us the scene this morning.
Well, it's really emotional here this morning, actually. I think more and more people are arriving as the morning goes on, whether they are on their commute to work or taking their children to school, but many people coming with flowers, cards, tributes, letters, teddy bears even, to come and lay them here at Buckingham Palace, this most iconic of buildings, synonymous with the monarchy, and of course was the Queen's official residence here in London. And as you can see, the tributes just continue to grow and grow, and I think we're going to see a steady stream of flowers being left here today. Well, I'm joined by a guest with me, Miles. Miles has come all the way down from Oxford to pay your respects. Miles, how do you feel this morning?
Today is a very significant day. My mum's boss died. As children, we always say, what does your mum do? And she said she worked for the Queen. She worked in the College of Arms and in Buckingham Palace, met Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, walking down on the back corridors, and she's just been there all our lives. And I think today will be in the memory of many people for the rest of their lives. I came down to pay my respects and to photograph it in film because I thought digital's fine, but I wanted to have something of permanent memory that would last forever. And yeah.
You said your mum worked for the royal household. I mean,
yes,
that's an incredible
she worked for the Earls, and she also, when Winston Churchill passed away, she was part of the team that organised his funeral, and he was even thanked personally by Lady Churchill herself. So there's a very strong connection, and yeah, it's just a very, very sad day, and I think a lot of people, it's going to be delayed, you know, just shock of what's actually happened, and I think it's going to be the next 10 days will be days of mourning for a lot of people.
It's extremely emotional. I mean, reading some of those letters and cards, it's heartbreaking. And how was your mother when she heard the news?
My mother was very upset, very sad. Unfortunately, she's too frail to come down here, so I thought, well, I've got to come down here on her behalf. So she's 79 and not in the best of health, so I thought, well, if she can't do it, then I have to. And yeah, it's just a very sad day.
And for her generation, for your mother's generation, I mean, the Queen was such a stalwart, 70 years on the throne. I mean, it's such an incredible achievement. And I think a lot of people down here also, there is sadness, but there is also a feeling of, let's celebrate what an incredible reign it was.
Yeah, my mum was obviously there for the coronation, back in 1952. And was always a strong supporter of the royal family, and and loved her. And I think we do want to celebrate the royal family because they are what holds the United Kingdom together, and makes us all proud to be English, to be British. So, yeah, I think today it will be as celebrating her life as much as anything. I think wearing black is correct, but she always wore bright colours. And I think sometimes we should wear bright colours at funerals because it's celebrating their life, which is just as important. You want to remember who you were, not, you know, the passing of someone. And I think she was so many people, mother, granny, whatever. Sorry.
Charles, it's a very emotional day. Thank you for talking to us and really appreciate your time. Miles there, who came down specially early from Oxford this morning, as he said he knew the crowds were going to be really growing here, and I'm sure they am. More and more flowers by the minute, and a real sense of emotion here this morning at Buckingham Palace.
Jessica, you were there last night. There's been many images and many comments, and those will continue over the next few days, weeks and months. And certainly your guest there, I think, sums up what I think many people will feel this morning, is that we almost feel that we've lost our own mother, our own grandmother, the person that was so synonymous for all of us with the monarchy. One of the things that Julia and I were talking about was the amazing picture last night, I don't know if you were there, on the Mall, when all the London black cabbies, the pictures there on screen, all just drove, turned their lights on and just, out of respect, stayed there. And this outpouring of emotion crosses every single part of our society, doesn't it, Jess?
Absolutely, and what a tribute from those black cabs. I mean, it was such a sight to see them all down the Mall, those shiny black cabs with their lights on in the pouring rain. I mean, what an image to have from last night. And I think, you know, people were sharing stories with the cab drivers were sharing stories with them, and, you know, such an iconic British brand to be here last night. Really just a lovely mark of respect, and some great pictures of the cab drivers. You know, I'm sure that will be the conversation in every cab today, won't it? I mean, if you get in a black cab today, what will you be talking about? Of course, you'll be talking about the Queen. And as they drive here past Buckingham Palace, I mean, there is quite a heavy police presence here this morning, perhaps even more so than there was last night. A lot of the roads around Buckingham Palace closed off as well. So it's hard actually to drive close to the palace today for obvious reasons. A huge security operation, of course, underway, but a lovely tribute from the cab drivers here last night.
Thank you very much indeed there. Let's look right now at some of this morning's front pages. And I have to say, before this tragic news we had yesterday, I think we would have expected it all to be about the announcement about the energy price cap and this statement that was made by the brand new Prime Minister in the House of Commons. But of course, as we know with all Prime Ministers, events, dear boy, events take their toll. And this is how the front pages are paying tribute to Her Majesty. Let's start with The Sun. And the Sun features a black and white photograph of the Queen and says, "We loved you, Ma'am." Absolutely iconic photograph there. The Times reflects the Queen's life in service and is wrapped in a special cover dedicated to the monarch. And I have to say that front page could almost be a front page from 20 years ago or 40 years ago. It's an iconic front page of the you know, the paper of the official paper of record,
absolutely.
Isn't it? The Daily Mirror thanks the Queen for her service on its front page, a very different image of the Queen. And it's interesting how some of the papers have chosen images of the Queen in recent years, and some have chosen images of her as a much younger monarch.
There was something going around last night. There were 4 pictures of her, did you see, from the first time, and then I think at about 40, and then at about 60, and then about a year ago. Extraordinary. I mean, 96 years.
Yeah, and an image that is just part of backdrop of our life. Well, let's look at the Daily Telegraph now. They share a black and white image of the Queen, along with one of her famous quotes: "Grief is the price we pay for love." The Daily Mail goes with a picture of the Queen as Princess Elizabeth, one of the papers to go with a much younger picture in colour, and the line, "Our hearts are broken." Well, let's get the reaction from our new panel right now. We're joined by broadcaster Afia Hagan. We have talkTV's royal editor Sarah Hewson, who's with us all morning, and we have royal commentator Angela Levin. Thank you all for being here. Wish it was under happier circumstances. Can I start with you, Angela, first of all? You're a royal biographer. You've written many biographies about key figures from older to younger. Your response yesterday at the news that we had and what it means for the nation.
Yeah, I thought I'd been kicked in the stomach, actually. I couldn't believe it because I'd seen her 2 days before. I knew she wasn't well, but suddenly for her to leave us was very, very painful.
And you and I were discussing her on my show yesterday, on the breakfast show yesterday, and we were discussing whether or not if she couldn't actually be in a position where she could, travel to London to meet with royals and couldn't take the Privy Council meeting even by Zoom, and we discussed whether or not the time was coming for her to perhaps step back even more from her royal duties, and we talked about the idea of having a Prince Regent. And it is extraordinary that we had that conversation on the day that she died.
I don't think that would have ever happened.
I don't think
the Queen would ever
because she
have
made,
back.
when she was 21, she said that I will do it however long or short my life is, and she will, be loyal and work for the country and the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I shall be devoted to your service.
Yes, and because she's a religious person and she said that with God in mind, I think that she would never have stepped down. But I thought that somehow she was in such pain when she was doing things that she shouldn't feel guilty if she did.
How many of us
back.
are working at 96?
I think that's the point, Sarah. If I can bring you back in. I'm interested in what you, Angela, said. You felt like you were kicked in the stomach yesterday. Yeah. We all sort of knew that she wasn't well. We all sort of felt that this potentially was a possibility. She was 96 years of age, OK, which by anybody's standards is exceptional, incredible, whether you're working or not. But still the sense of shock, Sarah, is so palpable for everybody, not just in this country, across the Commonwealth, across the world, because she's been this person for so long.
The constant. And I wonder if our sense of shock is partly because it is incomprehensible. It is so hard to imagine what the United Kingdom looks like without Queen Elizabeth II. Even this morning, as we were saying the words, King Charles III.
I know. God save the King.
God save the King. Stamps will change. Pound
post
notes
boxes
will change. Post boxes.
So much.
It was interesting, actually, that the news first emerged, the first hint that the Queen was seriously unwell emerged while we were being in this big set piece in the House of Commons. And first we knew that something was going on, was that notes were being passed to the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, brand new in the job, of course, giving this major statement about the cost of living crisis and energy caps. And a note was passed to her by one of the Cabinet Office Ministers, Nadhim Zahawi. And then a note was passed to his opposite number in the Commons, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner. And again, talking of our shock and your shock, it was noticeable, if you look back at the footage, their faces, and the note was passed to Keir Starmer.
I was wondering what it said on that note, actually. I was watching it and I was thinking, this Operation London Bridge, I mean, the Prime Minister was the first. Was she told at that point, or was she told to leave the Commons? Do we know anything?
She wasn't told. The Queen was after the Queen's death, the Prime Minister was told at 4:30. I understand the note said something along the lines of the Queen is seriously ill. She's not expected to recover. I think was what was the shocking.
Can I say, I think one of the reasons why we can't believe it, and for somebody of 96, is that actually if you are a monarchist, as I am, the royal family becomes attached to your family.
Yes.
You want to see the children, you want to see them grow up, you're fascinated.
She felt like the nation's mother, grandmother, and I think
that's
the
connection to generations past.
Well, I think I was saying, if I bring a theory, and I was saying about how I felt that she as a person transcended, if you like, so many parts of society. I want to talk about the Commonwealth quickly. I know you've been working on some Canadian television this morning and overnight. Over the last few months, we've heard about certain nations that don't want to be part of it. But the reaction in America, Canada, that you've gleaned over the last few hours to this news?
I mean, the reaction has been absolutely massive. I've been doing some TV in Ghana as well, a former British colony. And, it's like you said, the Queen herself, not so much the royal family, but the Queen transcended that. And she did feel like everyone's mother, everyone's grandmother. Speaking to my own mother about it yesterday, she was absolutely devastated. My mother-in-law is named after the Queen and was born on the day that Ghana gained independence from the United Kingdom. So she's very invested in the Queen. And, you know, doing Canadian coverage, very, very, very emotional. And people are very, very shocked. And I think there's a real air of, we always thought the Queen would be here. You called her the constant, right? She kind of felt immortal in a way.
But also
And,
someone who we've had to share with the world, because she's not just our Queen, as you said, she's Queen
But we're
of
very proud
14
of
other
her.
countries and, of course, head of the Commonwealth.
But that made us very, very proud of
I agree.
her. I mean, because she managed all these different countries with different theories and different feelings and different things that they liked. But everybody loved her.
I just think that word transcends. Sarah, just before you do the news headlines, can I ask you also, in terms of the royals rushing up there, we reported at 7 o'clock that Anne and, I believe, Charles were at her bedside when she passed at around 4:30. The others didn't make it. That's going to be difficult as a family to deal with.
Yes, and but I do think they will take great comfort from the fact that the Queen was at her, perhaps one of her favourite homes at Balmoral, that she had had a summer there, that she had had visits from members of the family. The Prince of Wales had been a regular visitor there, the Duke of York had been there, the Cambridges had been to visit her, she had been out for picnics. It is the place at which she was at her most relaxed. And for her to end her days there, a place that was incredibly special to both her and her late husband, I think is very significant and will give great comfort to the family.
Listen, so much to come from the panel and so much to come, as we've said, over the next few hours and days, and what will happen with the funeral and the mourning and what that means for people watching this morning. What does it mean for schools? What is it? Apparently they're going to stay open, which is great, but what does it mean for businesses? What does it mean for sporting events, the Parliament? What questions will be asked? So much coming up, but at 7:30 on this Friday morning, the day after the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Let's get the latest news headlines now from our news team.
Good morning, I'm Zora Suleiman. The nation is waking up in mourning following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace announced that Britain's beloved longest-reigning monarch died peacefully yesterday afternoon at her Scottish estate Balmoral, with her family by her side. King Charles III, who became the new monarch immediately, said his mother's death was a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. He and his wife Camilla, now the Queen Consort, are believed to have spent the night at Balmoral, but they're expected to travel back to London today, ready for King Charles's first audience with the new Prime Minister and his first address to the nation. At midday, bells are expected to toll at St Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, with gun salutes set to be fired at Hyde Park and at the Tower of London. Parliament will also start 2 days of special tributes, and the government will confirm the length of national mourning, which is likely to be 12 to 13 days, up to the day after the Queen's funeral. The British public and the royal family will now come together to remember the monarch and give thanks for her 70-year reign. Among the tributes from inside the family, Sarah, the Duchess of York, who said she leaves an extraordinary legacy. She will miss her more than words can express. Within hours of the announcement last night, crowds began to gather and lay floral tributes at the gates of Buckingham Palace, where people could be heard singing "God Save the Queen." They also gathered at Windsor, the Queen's former official residence, and at Sandringham, where crowds paid tribute.
Gutted. I think she's a remarkable woman. I think she's done the royal family proud. And yeah, just, you know, as a role model as well, absolutely fantastic. I don't think there'll be anyone like her again. I just feel sad that the Queen's dead and just
sad, mate, aren't you?
Yeah.
End of an era. Yes, definitely. She's all I've ever known, and all of us, won't it be, that we've only ever known the Queen here.
Well, as a mark of respect, stores across the country are set to be closed and events cancelled. A decision is expected later on whether this weekend's football games will be postponed. UEFA decided last night's game involving Manchester United and West Ham should go ahead. A minute's silence was held at both grounds before kick-off. Her Majesty was, of course, a huge patron of horse racing, and the British Horse Racing Authority has confirmed today's schedule has been cancelled. And now back to Jeremy and Julia in the studio.
Well, the Queen has guided the nation through war, political crisis and disasters, as well as being a figurehead for some of the most joyful moments of celebration.
Royal historian Dr. Tessa Dunlop joins us now to talk about a truly remarkable reign and what is in store for the country over the next 10 days. Tessa, thank you so much for joining us this morning on Talk Breakfast. Many people quite rightly saying that this is a defining moment for this royal family. This lady who transcended almost every part, I think, of society and has been a constant for us all for 70 years. How will you as a historian think that she will be remembered?
Well, it's extraordinary. She is, as we keep saying, extraordinary because she presided over an era of unprecedented change. Social change, global change. And as it keeps being reiterated, she was this remarkable constant. When she came to the throne, a lot of people have reiterated this idea of her having this steadfast relationship with Winston Churchill, her first prime minister. He certainly was utterly devoted to her, but actually didn't quite begin that way. He was a deep and dear friend of her father, the late King George VI, and was deeply shocked upon news of his death. Remember, this was a man of just 56, so 40 years younger than our late Queen. And when he was woken up and told, you know, bad news, sir, he said, bad news, the worst. And when he was consoled with, but you've got this wonderful young Queen, he said, she's just a child. You know, he couldn't quite imagine what was going to come next. And I think that is often the case, you know, historically, when we look back, let alone when we've had the longest reigning monarch ever, it's very hard to imagine a replacement because the monarch is by definition so omnipresent in all our lives. And as you mentioned, you know, look down a stamp on a letter or, you know, on a pillar box, or especially this year with the Platinum Jubilee. But it's also, of course, not just for the royal family, a huge shift, but likewise for our new government. Churchill, who was not having his finest hour, he was, you know, back being the prime minister, really far too old in 1952, but he gave the most extraordinary valedictory speech, you know, talking of how death had come as if a companion for the late king. And he really marked himself out in that hour. And of course, Liz Truss, it's a far harder task. And it's interesting how the optics have been totally reversed, where we had this very, very old, experienced prime minister who knew the late monarch very well, you know, we dined with him every week during World War II, and this brand new, pristine, young Queen. And of course, now we have this brand new prime minister, you know, I think possibly met Her Majesty only just 2 days ago for the first time, and a much older, very old new monarch in his 74th year. I'm thinking back at Victoria's son Bertie. I mean, Queen Victoria was all sort of desperate about Bertie's behaviour and saying, oh, this is wretched, he'll never do as a king. And in fact, he was really quite a good king. But upon news of his mother's death, he was 59, which was quite an age in 1901. And he said, it has come 20 years too late.
Indeed. Tessa, when we think about this incredibly long second Elizabethan age that we've had with Queen Elizabeth II, and you think the three probably greatest monarchs of this country all being women, how do you think people will judge, say, her place in history against other of our great monarchs, given how she spanned, well, 2 centuries effectively?
Well, she had a fascinating task, because by the time Elizabeth came to the throne, all political power had been ceded. Under Victoria, they still had these sort of executive powers. They looked to exert influence. And we know she was very unpopular when she tried to do that sometimes, Victoria. By the second golden Elizabethan age, as Churchill framed it, you know, she was utterly symbolic. That was her role, and it had been hugely invested in. It was a deliberate gear change in the late 19th century, early 20th century, when there was a lot of posturing on the world stage, that we would get good at pomp and ceremony. It had not always been thus. And so she came to symbolise tradition, almost anachronistic ideas, mythical ideas of Britishness, and indeed at the time this transition from empire to Commonwealth, which is why you had that spectacular golden carriage for her coronation, you know, ideas of times gone by. And yet she was also this wonderfully fresh young woman in a very conventional decade, the 1950s. So there was sort of, in terms of imaging, there were these beautiful tensions and contradictions which helped carry her across very difficult times. You know, a period when a lot of countries were looking to find their way between empire and independence. And somehow, because she was this young girl, she was this soft human bond, and went on that storming Commonwealth tour in 1953-54 for 6 long months. And the sort of turnout, you know, so 7 million people, I think, saw her in Australia, the like of which we'll never see again. And Philip sort of went, oh, it was the institution. Well, yes, but it was also the Queen, and of course him. He was devastatingly good looking. You know, they'd just wowed America and Canada before the late King had died. They had a sort of a pristine Hollywood image, really, before the great age of vast mass media. There was still a considerable, you know, media interest and presence, but not quite in the way we know it today. And she's carried us through that globally with this sort of soft female image. But then, of course, more domestically, there was also a period of huge social change, which was particularly challenging as someone who's a figurehead of a traditional institution and also as defender of the faith. And she had to negotiate that. And of course, really her strength and stay during that time was being locked in to this marriage with Prince Philip.
Thank you very much indeed, Angela. I really appreciate that.
Tessa Dunlop.
Brilliant. Can I ask you, Julia? I was listening to Tessa talking about tradition, and the thing that astounded me was this constitutional monarchy whereby, you know, she only ever gave advice. 15 prime ministers. We saw the other day, the last one, touching hands with Liz Truss before she set up that new government. You'd love to have known whether she craved to give more advice, or did it subtly, or said, maybe you should think about that, because she knew everything.
And how much it would have changed over the years when she is a very young woman.
Yeah.
I'm sure Angela Levin can touch on this. When she was a very young woman, she would have been taking advice from the likes of Winston Churchill, and over later years
would be giving
advice. And I saw a clip from Tony Blair, which I think recorded long ago for Obituaries, where he was talking about how it was the only time he could have a conversation with somebody when he had those moments with her, those weekly meetings. Private, where he knew he could talk completely freely and it would never go anywhere. Angela, how much do you think she did say privately and quietly and subtly to her Prime Ministers?
This is wrong, or do something different.
But she wasn't a micromanager. You know, she didn't actually believe in telling people what to do.
She knew her constitutional role.
Yeah. Yes, but in the sort of minute detail. I mean, with Prince Charles is absolutely concerned with detail, but she wasn't. And I think she spoke according to whether she liked the Prime Minister or whether she didn't, and she would give hints. And I think she would do her wonderful, very short phrases that actually contained an awful lot, and a sort of cynicism or encouragement. And I think she would question them. Well, I know that she would question them quite firmly, so that she knew exactly what was going on.
And leave them all absolutely aware of exactly what she meant.
Slightly scared, yes, just slightly.
Well, the Queen, of course, dedicated her public life to the service of her people over the last 70 years. Unbelievable. And devoted her private life to her family. And one man who saw that dedication up close was Paul Burrell, who began his own life of service as a royal footman at just 19 years of age. We're joined by him now live. Paul, good morning. A sad day, a day for reflection, a day, I think, where people will want to know what's coming next. Let's talk about the Queen that you knew, up close and personal. We've heard, Paul, already this morning, tributes about how she had a cheeky side, how she was very normal, very humble, but everything is about her service and her dedication to both her nation and her country.
I'm devastated. I didn't expect this news so quickly. I knew she wasn't well. And as Angela says, she dedicated her life to her country and her service to the country. You know, to know the woman herself, I was very lucky from an early age to be shaped and inspired by an incredible human being. And I just don't know what the country is going to be like without her. It'll never be the same. Godspeed, Your Majesty.
I have to say, Julia, I'm sort of with Paul. I think, you know, we will obviously naturally talk about the mourning and how we'll remember. And they always say, don't they, in grief, you go through all these different emotions. But one does sit here and think, what's next? Because she's been that constant.
It is so momentous. And when we think back, look, Paul Burrell, you had a ringside seat to what was playing out in the marriage of Diana and Charles, of course, and how devastating and damaging that was for the monarchy as an institution, and the question marks that were raised about the future of the monarchy. One of the things that's very obvious that she has done in recent years, the Queen, is to basically solidify, to cement her legacy, and for Prince Charles, and talking about him, you know, being the next king, but also the role of Camilla as his Queen consort. What did you make of that when she made that statement at the Platinum Jubilee?
Well, I think she's used, Prince Charles has used her goodwill to tell the people that this is the way the Queen would like it. This is a smooth passage into the next monarchy. We have to cross that bridge to get to William and Kate. Now, as you well know, I'm not a huge fan of King Charles and Queen Camilla. I never have been. But I am a huge fan of King William and Queen Kate when we get there. So we have to cross this bridge. It's for a short time. It is a constitutional monarchy. The Prince of Wales...
Oh, goodness me. I think we may have lost that line. Oh, Paul
he's
Burrell
back.
is
Okay.
back.
He's back.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The tech glitches affect us on every day. Don't worry. I think we're all used to this. And even the Queen probably had some of her Zoom connections.
There was an amazing... Did you see that with her when she went, oh, you're there?
Yes,
Amazing when she did
exactly.
Zoom. I know you're not a fan, Paul, of King Charles and Queen Camilla. I would venture the other side and simply say that maybe one of the things that the Queen's legacy teaches us all is that time and things move on, and I would prefer my king to be happy. I, like you, look at perhaps the next generation, but I would say that I think if Charles is going to take on this momentous role, he wants the woman he loves by his side.
Yes, I agree with you, and we all have to move on. I have moved on in my life too. But I think things will never be the same. And as Angela says, the Queen was measured. And when she spoke to her prime ministers, she would say things like, do you think so? Do you think that's the best way? And that's how the Queen tackled difficult situations. I think the Prince of Wales is very different. Sorry, I still keep calling him the Prince of Wales. The King is very different, and his approach will be very different. His mother always wanted a smooth passage. She always wanted a quiet time. She didn't want fuss in the family. She didn't want upset in her family.
And how significant...
She wanted...
Apologies, Paul, but how significant do you think it was that she wanted to be seen as being in good health, as still being able to carry out her duties, even in the final days of her life? It was obviously very important to her that she didn't want to do a public event if she had to be in a wheelchair, and she clearly didn't like even using a cane, even though at 96 no one would have expected anything else. But it was so important for her, wasn't it, to be seen as this figure of strength still?
Yes. Her dignity was still there at the end. You didn't know that she was using a wheelchair inside Windsor Castle and Balmoral, and you didn't see these things. She didn't want you to see these things. She wanted to retain her dignity, and she wanted to go out strong, and she did. And I think to die at Balmoral is significant because she loved Balmoral. Her family loved Balmoral, and I can see her now skipping through the heather with Princess Margaret, with baskets, collecting blueberries and wild strawberries. And fun times were had there at Balmoral, and that's a fitting place for her to end her life.
Paul, you've been massively involved with the family up there in Balmoral at the Palace of at the Buckingham Palace. We talked, obviously, about the nation, the world, the Commonwealth. We also have to remember this is family grief as well. What will be going on? Will they be spending time? Will they do what we believe the royal family does, stiff upper lip, get on with it? Or will there be periods of quiet reflection, I suspect?
All of that. And they will have lunches and meals together in the dining room without the Queen. And I presume she's upstairs in her bedroom. She will be prepared now, and the family will have been to see her and spent some time with her. And I think that's significant too, because Balmoral is, of all the royal houses, Balmoral is a home.
Yeah.
And all the children have grown up there. The Queen brought her children there, and they played there on the lawns and on the swing there. There are famous photographs of them all having good times, happy times, relaxed times, and family times at Balmoral. And that's what they're doing now. They're all together. And I knew the announcement wouldn't come until all the family were there safe at Balmoral.
Yeah.
And they were in lockdown. And then I knew it was coming. I just knew it was coming. Because she didn't look quite right yesterday with the Prime Minister. She almost looked propped up. And I could see everyone behind the scenes sort of putting her in her place. And then when the Prime Minister left, taking her down again and putting her back in her room. I knew she was looking so frail and so poorly at that stage.
Paul, thank you very, very much indeed. Back to our panel, Sarah Afia and Angela Levin. I just want to pick up on one of the things that Paul Burrell said, because you were nodding and so was I. Prince Charles, I have a theory here.
King Charles.
King Charles, well done. All right. For 73 years, he's waited for his destiny through birth. And I have a degree of sympathy with the man in that if he says nothing, what's his point? And if he opens his mouth, he's interfering. I actually believe, Angela, that this will be... We talk about the Queen's stoicism, we talk about how she... I think he will grow brilliantly into this, and I think this will be his defining moment.
I'm sure about it, actually. I spent a year with him in the run-up to his 70th birthday, and I was absolutely astonished how wonderful he was with what we could call ordinary people, how he wanted to help people to make something of their lives, and he'd give them a chance. But I think what's very interesting is his respect for his mother. Although they didn't get on when he was young, he knows he's got lots of ideas of being more modern. But he wouldn't say or do anything about it because he thought it was very rude to do that for his mother, because he never wanted to try her to feel that he didn't want her to carry on.
You could feel a real softening between them in their relationship. Now, I know, Angela, you've written a biography about to come out about Camilla. You've written about the younger royals, like Prince Harry, about Camilla. How significant a role do you think that Camilla is going to play? It was very important that the Queen made it clear she's going to be Queen's consort. There is nothing up to debate or discussion about that. How important a role will she play alongside King Charles?
Well, it's very interesting, actually, because she will play a role and she won't play a role. Her absolute first, most important thing for her is that she doesn't trample on anything. She doesn't want to share things. She wants to support him and encourage him and make him feel that he can go ahead and do things. Yet, if she's working, say, on her own, as she does with some charities like domestic violence, she's very, very powerful. But she's especially done things that won't tread on his feet, and I think that that's very important. But she is the one person he can talk to and to cry with, and she will, I think, be... Consort. She's very dignified. Consort. And also, I don't like the word consort. I like her to be just called Queen, actually.
Well, I think... Can I say, sorry, to Sarah, and I agree with you, Angela, I disagree with Paul Burrell. Everybody's got different opinions. I don't believe for 1 minute that he coerced the Queen into saying that. I believe the Queen, to her very last moment, knew exactly what she was wanting. And actually, one of the nice things is dying. Absolutely.
Succession all the way through.
Her son, for whatever went on in the past, and that woman adore each other. And I think she has grown into people's affection. Do you not?
I totally agree with that. And I think if you look at her 75th birthday, which she celebrated only recently, we saw much more of Camilla than we ever had before. There was a documentary. She edited Country Life magazine. She was on the front cover of magazines. We also saw her during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations stand next to the then Prince of Wales as he gave his tribute to his mother. And I was there at that concert, and as I saw her stand there on stage, I thought, this is about the next phase. This is preparing the nation as well for the King.
They had such a lot in common, of course, Camilla and the Queen. You know, they could talk horses all day long. They could talk dogs all day long. And they both have a very similar sense of humour, very quick and self-deprecating. So they had all the conditions of a warm relationship. It was just because what happened wasn't appropriate
at
decades
the time.
ago.
In a sec, I'll bring you in, but 10 days of national mourning has commenced, as we know. A service will be held today at St Paul's Cathedral in central London. Now, the Queen, as head of state and defender of the faith, has been present in the front row at every great state occasion in our great cathedrals. To give us a perspective on this now, we're joined by Dr Gavin Ashton, a former chaplain to the Queen. Good morning, sir. Explain in some detail how important the Queen's faith was to her and how that spreads out across her family, if you could.
Well, I think it was not only important to her, I think we'll find it was important to us as well. We know her as a kind, cheerful, indomitable, dutiful, humorous and generous person. And these aren't simply attributes that you're born with and keep unpressured through life. They're moral virtues that grow. And her Christian faith is the source of one of the reasons we like her and love her, because we found her to be a very attractive human being. The capacity to love and to forgive and to trust, these are things that mark human beings out. And she became ever more beautiful as she grew older as a human being, precisely because she was nurtured by her Christian faith, and it produces these kinds of fruits. But in practical terms, she began by being enormously conscious that she was called by God to this role. And the poor thing, she must have sat through more Anglican sermons than any other person alive ever. And she went to so many formal religious occasions. But we know from the way that from small insights we have, and particular moments like when Billy Graham arrived from America, far from being fazed or threatened or alarmed by an American evangelist, she welcomed him, and they had some very intimate and moving talks, and she found her own faith seriously refreshed by this extraordinary man who brought religious revival to her kingdom. And one of the ways in which we know that her faith has developed is that there was a moment in her annual year when, if you like, the Elizabeth the Queen and Elizabeth Windsor came together, and that was her Christmas speech. And as she grew older, they grew more and more specifically spiritual and more avowedly Christian in a way that was immensely moving for those who were following what was going on. And so she trod this journey of faith right to the end. And I think her formidable character and her intense beauty as a human being were expressions of her faithfulness and her courage to the end.
Dr Gavin Ashton, thank you very much indeed, very much appreciate that. Coming back to you, Afia Hagan, it's interesting how much the Queen's faith plays such a huge role in her life, and of course as head of state and head of the Church of England, of course. It's also a crucial part of why she was still on the throne at an advanced age and in ill health, because she felt that she was there by dint not just of birth but also by dint of God.
Absolutely. When she took the vow that she would be the monarch, that she would be the sovereign, that she would serve, she didn't just say that to her people, she said it to God as well. And because of her deep Christian faith, she felt that she couldn't step down in service, and she wouldn't step down in service. We were never going to see a Charles regency. She was always going to be queen until she literally wasn't here anymore. And I think because of her Christian faith, she made that vow to God, and she did it right to the very end.
And I think that, when you're discussing death and a passing, it's not easy, is it, to put it into words? Let's not lie about that. But what I think you're right about, Fia, and I think is extraordinary about the Queen, is you see her on Tuesday, and on Thursday she passes, and yet, I was going to say the wrong thing, that's brilliant, isn't it? Rather than spending 6 months incapacitated and then all of the constitutional things, we have that great abiding memory of her as the grandmother shaking hand. It's on the screen again with Liz Truss, committing for the 15th time a new government. And then in the place where she got engaged, in the place where she was at her happiest, she passed peacefully away.
I think that's incredible. I agree with you. It's amazing. We saw her there on Monday, working to the very end, involved in this really, really significant part of British politics, of British history, the kissing hand ceremony, our 15th Prime Minister, and, you know, unfortunately, 2 days later, she's dead, but incredible to the end.
So much still to come. Thank you for now, ladies. It is, of course, Friday the 9th of September. We'll wake up as a nation with a king after the tragic and sad death of Queen Elizabeth II yesterday, right now, at almost 8 o'clock. We'll get the latest news headlines from our news team.
Good morning, I'm Zora Suleiman. The nation is waking up in mourning following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace announced that Britain's beloved longest reigning monarch died peacefully yesterday afternoon at her Scottish estate Balmoral, with her family by her side. King Charles III, who became the new monarch immediately, said his mother's death was a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. He and his wife Camilla, now the Queen Consort, are believed to have spent the night at Balmoral, but they're expected to travel back to London today, ready for King Charles's first audience with the new Prime Minister and his first address to the nation. At midday, bells are expected to toll at St Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, with gun salutes set to be fired at Hyde Park and at the Tower of London. Parliament will also start 2 days of special tributes, and the government will confirm the length of national mourning, which is likely to be 12 to 13 days, up to the day after the Queen's funeral. The British public and the royal family will now come together to remember the monarch and give thanks for her 70-year reign. talkTV spoke to Miles Gone, whose mother worked for the Queen. He arrived at Buckingham Palace first thing this morning.
Today is a very significant day. My mum's boss died. As children always say, what does your mum do? And said she worked for the Queen. She worked in the College of Arms and in Buckingham Palace, met Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, walking down on the back corridors, and she's just been there all her lives.
Within hours of the announcement last night, crowds began to gather and lay floral tributes at the gates of Buckingham Palace, where people could be heard singing "God Save the Queen." They also gathered at Windsor, the Queen's former official residence. And worldwide tributes have poured in for the Queen, who was head of state of the UK and 14 other countries, including Canada and New Zealand. Their Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, called the monarch extraordinary. And in Jamaica, the public have been expressing their feelings of loss. And now back to Jeremy and Julia in the studio.
Good morning and welcome back to Talk Television Breakfast, and welcome to our extended coverage of the tragic and sad death yesterday of Queen Elizabeth II. We are waking up today to something that I guess had seemed unthinkable for so long: life without our beloved Queen. Now, anyone unbelievably under the age of 70, and that is the vast majority of people in this country, have never known any other monarch. Her Majesty was, to all of us, a constant in our lives, and her death yesterday afternoon remains a deep shock and leaves us as a nation in mourning, Julia.
Yes, and today is also a new dawn for the monarchy. We're waking up to a new king, Charles III, and Britain has a new Queen Consort, Camilla. Well, as the nation comes to terms with the loss, let's take a look back at the Queen's remarkable life.
Born on April the 21st, 1926, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was the first child of the then Duke and Duchess of York. As King Edward's 8th niece, she wasn't destined to rule, but at the age of 10, her uncle abdicated, and the course of her life changed forever as she suddenly became heir to the throne.
We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen. And we are trying too to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war.
It was the start of the Second World War when a teenage Princess Elizabeth began public duties. She joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, which trained her to drive and repair trucks.
By her example, perhaps more than her service, she served her country.
And like thousands of others, she had a sweetheart in the forces. Her third cousin, young naval officer Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten. Shortly after her 21st birthday in 1947, they married at Westminster Abbey.
Elizabeth and Philip waved their thanks to the happy cheers from below.
The following year, she had a son, Prince Charles, and 2 years later, a daughter, Princess Anne. Then, in 1952, while the royal couple were on tour in Kenya, the news came through that Elizabeth's beloved father, King George VI, had died. And at 25, she had become queen.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service.
Her coronation took place a year later, in 1953. In the 10 years after being crowned, her popularity grew, along with the royal family. First the arrival of Prince Andrew, and then Prince Edward. As a committed head of the Commonwealth, the Queen has visited every nation, often repeatedly. In the 60s, she flew to a remarkable 28 countries in total. The 70s and the 80s were a mix of triumph and turmoil.
A day of tragic violence in Ireland. Lord Mountbatten of Brewer has been killed by an explosion on his yacht off the Republic's coast.
Then, in the 1990s, the Queen entered perhaps the most difficult decade of her reign, divorce and devastation.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
But there was worse to come with the death of Princess Diana in 1997. The Queen made an unprecedented live broadcast.
As your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart, first, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being.
5 years later, in 2002, the Queen faced more personal tragedy, losing her sister, Princess Margaret, and then Queen Elizabeth, the Queen's mother, 2 months later. But that summer was also one of celebration, as the Queen marked her Golden Jubilee. A decade later, golden became diamond. 4 days of celebrations ensued to mark the Queen becoming only the second monarch in history to reach such a milestone. On the 9th of September 2015, she became the longest-serving monarch Britain had ever seen, surpassing the reign of her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. The same year, her fifth great-grandchild was born. She now has 12. But in her 90s, the Queen was confronted with a number of crises within the royal family. Her grandson, Prince Harry, and his wife Meghan made a surprise announcement that they no longer wished to be senior royals and were, in effect, quitting the firm, a decision which Her Majesty said she was saddened by.
I will always have the utmost respect for my grandmother, my Commander-in-Chief, and I am incredibly grateful to her and the rest of my family for the support they have shown Meghan and I over the last few months.
Following Harry's departure, the Queen faced another scandal, this time surrounding her son, Prince Andrew, and his relationship with convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. The Duke of York was stripped of his titles and sacked of royal duties after settling a civil sexual assault case, paying his accuser what is believed to be a multi-million-pound sum. At the time, Britain was in the midst of an unprecedented global pandemic, and the Queen had been integral in helping steer the nation through, even making a rare special address to the British public during lockdown.
We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
But it was in April 2021 that the Queen was dealt the biggest blow when her husband of nearly 74 years, her strength and stay, the Duke of Edinburgh, died at the age of 99. Ever the dedicated public servant, Queen Elizabeth picked herself up and threw herself back into official duties.
There you are.
Just 4 days after his death. Her Majesty's own health came under the spotlight when, in October 2021, she spent a night in hospital having precautionary tests. A few months later, she tested positive for COVID and was forced to cancel a string of engagements and appearances. In recent months, worsening mobility problems led to her pulling out of a number of key events, including Remembrance Sunday and the state opening of Parliament. For the first time in 59 years, she missed the speech, having only missed 2 in the past due to pregnancies. And in an historic change of protocol, granted powers to her son and heir, Prince Charles.
Her Majesty looks forward to the celebrations taking place across the United Kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth.
In April 2022, Queen Elizabeth reached the remarkable age of 96 and achieved the major historical milestone of 70 years on the throne, with her Platinum Jubilee marked by celebrations and commemorations up and down the country. But just a few months after those celebrations, health concerns continued when she was forced to cancel a planned appearance at the Brewer Highland Games with her son, Prince Charles. Throughout the course of her 70-year reign, she has missed the event on just a handful of occasions. And another change of tradition came when, for the first time in her reign, Her Majesty welcomed the latest Prime Minister to Balmoral instead of Buckingham Palace. The Queen officially declared Liz Truss the 3rd female leader of the United Kingdom on September the 6th. But the next day was forced to cancel a Privy Council meeting in which she was supposed to officially swear in her cabinet. Doctors told Her Majesty to rest after a full day. Until the end, she continued, when health would allow, to uphold her appearances, often with her family by her side. During her 70-year reign, Queen Elizabeth has carried out more than 30,000 royal engagements, visited 110 countries, seen the rise and fall of 15 prime ministers, met with 13 US presidents, and has become patron of more than 600 charities. She leaves behind 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren, along with an unrivaled legacy and an unquestionable commitment to her country.
An amazing lady and an amazing reign. Today, though, King Charles III is expected to travel from Balmoral to London with Queen Consort Camilla ahead of making his first televised address to the nation. This is expected at around 6 p.m. tonight. Now, the King has already led tributes to Her Majesty shortly after the palace announced the death of Elizabeth II. Yesterday evening, King Charles released his first statement as monarch, and it read, "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and for all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know that her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." He continues, "During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be hugely comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held." Now, it's emerged this morning that the Queen died at her beloved Balmoral yesterday afternoon with just Charles and Princess Anne, her 2 eldest children, at her bedside. Other members of the royal family, including Princesses William, Harry, Andrew and Edward, dashed to Scotland but sadly did not make it in time. Joining us now outside Balmoral, has been all morning, Oliver, talkTV's correspondent, is still with us. Oliver, We keep asking you because I think it's important to point out to people tuning in that so much, Julia, of what's going to happen over the next few days, how long the mourning period, when it kicks off, all those sorts of things are difficult to comprehend. Any news, briefly, from Balmoral in the last hour, Oliver?
No news from Balmoral as to the official plans, the official timetable so far. We've also been in touch with Buckingham Palace. I think it's really important just to re-emphasise the fact that because Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II had died here up in Scotland, it adds an extra layer of complexity because there's the household staff here who will want to pay their final respects. The body at some point will be moved to Edinburgh and lay in state there for a number of days. And then the coffin will be put onto either the royal train or will be flown down to London. And all of those logistics, all of the pomp and pageantry that the royals are known for and that the country really will want to experience as it pays its respects to the longest lived, longest reigning monarch that we've ever had, that will have to be executed absolutely perfectly, because that is what ultimately Her Majesty will have wanted, and that is what the world is expecting. The world's eyes are upon us right now. Where I'm standing, there must be at least, I'd say, 20 camera crews. There's radio crews, not only from the UK. Right next to me, I've got a camera crew from Australia. A few away, there is somebody from Germany. This is internationally something which is being looked upon right now. I did just manage to speak to one of the press officers from the royal household who's here, and she was asking, is there tea and coffee facilities for you? Are there toilets available? And I think the fact that these questions are being asked shows that the Queen's passing was not something that they were expecting in enough time to be able to provide those facilities, and yet they are still making sure that everybody here is being taken care of. So at the moment, plans still being finalised. As soon as we've got any of that official confirmation, we will of course be sharing it with all of our viewers here on talkTV.
Thank you, Oliver. Right, MPs will gather in the Commons at midday to make statements and swear an oath of allegiance to the new king, whilst a 96-gun salute, one shot actually for every year of the Queen's life, will take place in central London and elsewhere too, marking, as I said, every year of her life. Meanwhile, mourners continue to hold a silent vigil outside BP as crowds gathered throughout the night. We'll shoot back to our correspondent Jessica King, who was outside BP last night and is there again this morning. Sum up for us briefly, Jessica, the mood. Is it one of deep sadness? Is it one of celebration, or is it a mixture?
I'd say it's definitely a mixture. I think this morning it seems to be sinking in a little bit more for people, and it just shows how much the Queen meant to everybody who's coming down here this morning. I've spoken to people who have got early trains down from wherever they live to come down to Buckingham Palace to leave flowers, to leave personal tributes and to come and pay their respects. We've actually been moved on from where we were earlier this morning, right outside the palace gates, just because it is getting so busy there with crowds coming to leave their tributes and their flowers. So it's definitely an emotional morning, I would say, down here.
Absolutely, Jessica, thank you very much. Outside Buckingham Palace, let's get some reaction from our panel right now. We're joined by Talk Radio's royal editor Rupert Bell, Talk TV's royal editor Sarah Hewson, and we have the former equerry to the Queen Mother, Colin Burgess, joining us once again. Good morning again to you both, all three of you. I think a lot of people waking up this morning, having got over the shock of the news yesterday, are wondering what happens now. We know there are these long-standing plans. They're in place for decades. They are rehearsed on a regular basis about what happens, the timeline from the moment the Queen dies. Operation London Bridge is the one that we've heard about, has been in the news, Sarah Hewson. But because she died, the Queen died in Balmoral, it's a different operation at the start, isn't it? Tell us what's happening over the next few hours, days, and indeed weeks.
Operation London Bridge is the overarching plan, and within that there are multiple other strands dependent on where she died, and so Operation Unicorn now comes into play, given that she died at Balmoral in Scotland. Today what we know is that the King and the Queen Consort will travel from Balmoral back to London. The King will meet with the Prime Minister. He will also meet the Earl Marshal, that's the Duke of Norfolk, and that is a very important meeting because the Earl Marshal is responsible for planning the details of the funeral. And so what is to happen over the course of the next 10, 12 days will be signed off by the King today.
Because even when they do have all these plans in place, things tend to change, don't they? There are depending on the expectations of what's going to be happening in coming weeks.
And also when the kind of the day is defined. So, for example, the death of the Queen is known as a D-Day, and then there's a timetable, as you say, of events of D+1, D+2, D+3.
We were talking about this off air actually. But we were wondering if D-Day was in fact yesterday or today. We think because of Scotland, but again we're pre-guessing.
Yeah,
and in terms of what happens next, see, the King Charles and his consort come to London. When are we going to see the Queen's coffin being moved? When are we expecting that, Sarah?
Well, it will be moved, but within Balmoral Castle, to the ballroom of Balmoral Castle, and there members of the royal household staff at Balmoral Castle will be able to pay their respects over the coming days.
Can I just stop you right there? The gates of Balmoral Castle have just opened up. We're not quite sure. We'll just keep that live feed going in case there are arrivals. Trying to bring you the news as it happens. Sarah, sorry, please continue, but let's keep those pictures on screen so we can bring that to you. We're not sure if there's any arrivals, new arrivals.
Yeah, we'll keep monitoring that. I mean, that gate is very busy. I was there on Tuesday for the transition of power.
You were there on Tuesday?
Yes, I was there outside that gate on Tuesday as Boris Johnson arrived and later Liz Truss. There is a car coming out now. Let's
just follow this if we can. We're not sure if that's members of the royal family.
Two Range Rovers there coming out of the front gate. We've already seen those barriers erected, haven't we, Colin, where crowds are expected. Yeah. Is it likely that we will see any of the royal family on... I always think, actually, these are very difficult times when, the nation is in mourning, but, of course, we are talking not about just a queen for these people, but, a grandmother, a mother, a close member of their family. Is it likely that we will see, as we saw post-Diana's death and the Queen Mother's death, the royal family coming out to look at some of the cards, the flowers, and perhaps meeting some of the mourners?
I think that's highly likely. I think, given how much time has passed now, and when you saw what happened when Diana died, when the Queen Mother died, and we've the country's moved on that much more, and I think you're very likely to see people coming in.
I was going to tell you, actually, well, all of you, actually, I live in Windsor. I'm lucky enough to live in Windsor, and you could see it and feel it last night. And my wife actually took young Oliver, who's 2.5, to the castle gates to lay some flowers, and it was really poignant. And I actually think there are some pictures there from Windsor last night, and people gathered and then barriers started. I think there will be a huge outpouring, and I think that the royals... It's interesting, because in the past that will be choreographed, but I can see it almost happening quite naturally, Rupert.
And I think it's also a way of the family understanding the nation's grief, because it's there in front of you.
Yeah.
You go and read what some of the cards and the messages. That, I think, is part of the family grieving as well, and understanding the nation's grief at her loss.
Do you think this time, let's not go back to what happened with Diana, but there were days, weren't there? There were moments when... I think this time...
There wasn't any plan.
No, but I can also see it because the monarchy's moved forward, Julia. I can see it happening more naturally. I can see William stopping his car and just getting out to have a look. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's much more likely to happen.
Yeah,
I think around Diana's death, there was a lot of rabbit-in-headlight moments for all sides, not knowing quite...
Do you think that...
There were two young boys.
As well.
Of course, but do you think that... I mean, we've talked this morning about how this has been practised and rehearsed. Do you think that what happened with Diana was part of the reason that it has been so well practised and rehearsed?
I think the thing was that Diana's death came as such a shock. There was no plan. They had to look at the Queen Mother's plan in order to try and work out what they were going to do.
But there are other parallels there as well, of course, because in 1997, when Diana died, again, much more of a shock as a young woman and in a car accident, that we had a very, very new Prime Minister. I mean, a few months in, Tony Blair having to handle a new regime handling this. We've got, again, a very new Prime Minister just 2 days into the job. Well, you're one formal day, actually, into the job, having met the Queen only on Tuesday. And making a major announcement in the House of Commons when the notice passed to her in the Commons. Now, of course, the Commons is actually, the Palace of Westminster is where a lot of the focus is going to be over the coming days, isn't it, Colin? We saw, of course, the lying in state of the Queen Mother, and hundreds of thousands of people queuing up round the block to come and see her for the days that she was lying in state in the Westminster Hall, and draped with the royal standard on her coffin and the guards, and a beautiful ceremony. Obviously, that is part of the Operation London Bridge, isn't it? That will be happening, so people will get a chance to pay their respects.
It is, but let's also not forget that this is the end of an era. This is the end of a generation for the royal family, and I think that all eyes will be on the royal family to see how this is dealt with and what happens next. And I think, given the fact this is such a landmark moment for the royal family, the end of an era, end of the longest reign that this country's ever known, I think that there will be expectation, I think, from people as to, we would like to see be led by the royal family.
And I think that apart from being led by them, I think it's interesting. Somebody said to me last night, 10 days seems an awful long time, but I think we have to understand, Rupert, the outpouring of grief and people up and down this country waking up this morning and, wondering about the things that we've talked about, schools, work, whatever. They will want the opportunity to mourn their Queen, won't they?
Absolutely. I think that's the whole point and why it is a 10-day period.
Yeah.
And it is, and with the lying in state, next weekend, that will be a sort of physical opportunity for people to go and pay their respects. But I think that is the important thing. It is a period of change, seismic change. And one of the things you talk about people don't quite know what's happening. Remember, she was on the reign for 70 years. The people who used to manage this, and remember this is military precision, there were people you could call upon who actually knew what happened at an occasion like this. We haven't had anybody in their working life who knows. So it's basically rules from the 50s being transposed to 2022.
And that's where we do see
it has been refined over the years, and it is extremely careful.
They practice this every year, I
they
read.
do rehearse.
They've literally practiced what's going to happen.
And there will be further rehearsals over the coming days.
And that's the other reason why we have days.
But we also had this with Prince Philip when he died, of course, and I think we should talk about the impact of that on the Queen in her final year of life. But actually, the plans for his funeral had to be massively curtailed because of COVID rules. And of course, that iconic image that I think we all have. I think there are a few key memories from the last couple of years we're going to have of the Queen, and one of those, crucially, is going to be the Queen sitting alone at her husband's funeral, obeying the rules unlike others, wearing her mask. Yeah, one of the few occasions she was pictured in one. One of the things I do love about the Queen is that she made it very, very clear she had really no time for religious restrictions. She clearly wanted life going back to normal. And there's footage of her...
Let's not go there.
I'm not talking about the politics.
I disagree.
I think she wanted life back to normal.
I think she felt she would do whatever the nation was asked to do.
I agree with you. And on screen now, Julia, is a picture of her. And I remember watching her get out of the car at Philip's funeral. And she looked suddenly smaller. And she looked suddenly more vulnerable. And yet, that stoicism we've talked about all morning, let's not get into a debate about masks, but she was. But there she was, symbolising what we've been told to do, whether we agree with it or not, at that moment. And again, leading from the front, be it the message is that, we will meet again, wearing the mask. I sort of feel this morning, I don't know about it, I'd like to know what you think personally, because I watched how it was broken yesterday, and I shed a tear. I've no harm in saying that, and got emotional and thought about what the old man would have done. Colin, you knew him. And then you come in this morning, and there's just... It feels almost like a void in my life, a personal thing.
And I think, Jeremy, that is why when we hear this address from King Charles III at 6 o'clock this evening, that will be very important, because we need to know what comes next. We are entering a new era.
Absolutely right.
Sorry, just got some news to you.
Yes, we just had that footage, didn't we, of the gates of Balmoral opening and 2 Range Rovers leaving. We've just had it confirmed that one of the people in those cars was Prince Harry. And, of course, he arrived very late yesterday evening, certainly after the Queen had lost her life. And, of course, that rushing to Balmoral yesterday, Colin, was clearly the sign that things were a lot more serious than even the Buckingham Palace had intimated. Prince Harry appears, as far as we can tell, given that journalists have been at the gates overnight, the first royal to leave Balmoral grounds.
I mean, they're going to have to leave at some point. So
I think that is quite possibly the most balanced and generic answer, because we're not going there today. But yes, first out, did he have breakfast with the rest? I don't know. Pictures you're seeing. Can I go back to just briefly ask all three of you? Let's start with you. How do you feel about this news, personally?
I feel sad. Genuinely, personally sad. I've got young children. I've got a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I saw them last night, and they were in their rooms, genuinely really sad. Both of them, and I sort of said to them as I was putting to bed, are you okay? And they just said, really sad that the Queen's died.
My son phoned me last night at 13 and said, it's really sad, isn't it? Well, Sarah, we've talked about protocol, but what do you feel?
I think this is a moment of incredible sadness and reflection. She was the backdrop to all of our lives. None of us sitting here have known any other monarch. But I also take great comfort from the fact that we talk about the details of the funeral being planned to precision. If the Queen could have picked somewhere to die and a way in which to go, actually, this was pretty perfect. It was in a very special place to her, Balmoral. She was at home. Her family had been visiting her over the course of the summer. She had 2 of her children by her side. She had just conducted that constitutional duty, swearing in the 15th Prime Minister, and right to the end.
And she'd had the Jubilee. Getting to the Jubilee, I think, was absolutely crucial, wasn't it?
I think that was probably in her mind
They say that about... we can all think of a moment where a family member, hung on.
For a
You're
wedding,
surprised
for a
I'm going to
child
ask you
who's
this.
born,
I only got 2 minutes. I've got Ruby. What do you feel about it this morning?
I was shocked by how surprised I am that regular viewers and listeners to the show... Well, no, I've been a Republican, but I've always had immense respect for the Queen. I mean, Rupert, you and I have discussed that every day. I think
transcending
she's...
again.
Yeah, no, I do think she's been magnificent, and I've never been more impressed with her than I have in the last few years, and how she has handled herself, and the humour that we've got to see. I don't think it matters. The politics don't matter, left or right.
You feel like you've lost somebody this morning.
You feel like it's someone you know, and even though we knew the news was coming, I think everybody choked a bit.
I completely agree. Rupert?
And I know when I heard... I was driving round a roundabout at the time, and I suddenly went, ooh. I just suddenly went, this is different. And I sort of almost wanted to look around in everyone in all the other cars, because everyone was probably listening to a radio station or whatever, and you just suddenly thought, this just feels like I'm driving into a new era now, and this felt...
I looked out last night, and you talked about the weather and the rainbow and the rain. There was... This is going to sound... There was almost an eerie silence.
Wasn't there? I felt that. I was walking up the road, actually, to a school event before I went to Piers Morgan's show last night, and it was amazing how many people were walking along the street and suddenly stopping and picking their phones, and it was as quiet as I've ever known it. But everyone just engrossed and looking shocked.
And the picture, Julie, is on screen now. I will never... people ask me in years to come, when that rainbow came out, those 2 rainbows above the skies of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, an extraordinary moment. Listen, so much more to talk about. And those, for people tuning in this morning, that's what we're talking about. It's, yes, a woman who reigned for 70 years, but what does it mean to you? How does it not just affect your life, but how is it affecting you today? And as Colin said, not just adults, children who have grown up knowing nothing at all. It is Friday morning. It is time for the latest news headlines from our news team on talkTV.
Good morning, I'm Zora Suleiman. The UK has entered a period of national mourning following the death of the Queen at the age of 96. Buckingham Palace announced that Britain's beloved longest-reigning monarch died peacefully yesterday afternoon at her Scottish estate Balmoral. King Charles III, who automatically succeeded his mother, led tribute, saying it was a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. He and his wife Camilla, now the Queen Consort, will return to London today, having spent last night at Balmoral, ready for his first audience with the new Prime Minister and his first address to the nation. The King is also expected to meet Earl Marshall, the Duke of Norfolk, who's in charge of the accession and the Queen's funeral, to approve the carefully planned schedule for the coming days. Well, to mark the Queen's death at midday today, Parliament will start 2 days of special tributes, and bells are expected to toll at St Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Abbey and Windsor Castle, with gun salutes set to be fired at Hyde Park and the Tower of London. Hundreds of people have gathered at Buckingham Palace gates to pay tribute to the Queen. talkTV spoke to Miles Gone, whose mother worked for the Queen. He arrived at Buckingham Palace first thing this morning.
Today is a very significant day. My mum's boss died. As children, we always say, what does your mum do? And she said, she worked for the Queen. She worked in the College of Arms and in Buckingham Palace, met Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, walking down on the back corridors, and she's just been there all her lives.
They also gathered at Windsor, the Queen's former official residence. And worldwide, tributes have poured in for the Queen, with the Dalai Lama now paying his respects, saying he was praying for her and offering condolences to King Charles. Well, the Queen was head of state of the UK and 14 other countries, including Canada and New Zealand. Their Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, called the monarch extraordinary. Well, as a mark of respect, events across the country will be cancelled and a decision is expected later on if this weekend's football games will be postponed. In entertainment, the final night of the proms has been called off and last night's Mercury Prize ceremony was cancelled due to the news. And Sir Elton John made a touching tribute, praising Her Majesty for leading the nation through some of its darkest moments. Now back to Jeremy and Julia in the studio.
Thank you very much there. Well, the time is now coming up to 8:33. Let's look at some of this morning's front pages now. And, of course, there's no surprises for guessing what is on the front page. Let's see how they are all paying tribute to Her Majesty. The Sun features a black and white photograph, as do many of the papers of the Queen, and says, "We loved you, Mum," very much reflecting the mood of the nation. There's extensive
30-page, actually, tribute inside. And what's amazing, Julia, is on the front, "We loved you, Mum," and on the back, King Charles III last night and his statements. It's an extraordinary tribute to an amazing woman.
But also, I think, really interestingly, the paper's having to make a choice between images of the Queen as we know her now, and as you can see on the back here, images of the Queen as we knew her then. And, of course, that image being so iconic because it's on every stamp and every letter. It's there throughout our lives, isn't it? The Times, of course, has a very special edition this morning, reflecting the Queen's life in service. It's wrapped in a memorial cover dedicated to the monarch. And again, a choice of a picture in the wraparound of the Queen as a younger woman, but on the front page, as we're showing on the screen right now, an image that, if it wasn't for the Queen's age, it could have been used. That newspaper could have been from the 1960s, 1970s, paper of record. And
actually, that's on the front page, I should say, which is what you saw on screen. But the wraparound, as Julia says, is the younger picture of the Queen there. And just an amazing... I just want to read this, actually, Julia. A quote from the Queen's Christmas broadcast in 1957. "I cannot lead you into battle. I do not give you laws or administer justice. But I can do something else. I can give you my heart and my devotion." This will get me, you see, now.
Don't.
"To these old islands and to all the peoples of our brotherhood of nations." Now,
absolutely beautiful.
At the risk of being called old-fashioned, I think the woman was an extraordinary woman, and it's... it is sad.
Yeah, again, it's like a picture from another age, isn't it? Well, let's look at some more papers. The Daily Mirror thanks the Queen for her service on its front page. And a sort of much darker image, much sort of with the shadows behind, but just a simple message.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And again, this echoes, of course, that wonderful video we had during the Queen's Jubilee, which, of course, was a complete surprise to even her closest family members, of Paddington Bear and her having tea, when we finally discovered what the Queen keeps in her handbag. It turns out it's marmalade sandwiches.
Did you see the... I don't know what it's called, because I'm not very cool, but there was a... What do you call it? Something on...
You're going to have to help
media,
us here.
and it had the back of the Queen. Have you seen this? With a coat and hat, walking off with her handbag, holding Paddington Bear's hand, and it said...
drawing by Charlie Mackesy.
Thank you very much. And it said, "I've done my duty now, Paddington. Can you take me to my prince?"
Yeah.
A lot of,
and
for a woman of great faith.
And were you...
She will...
Yes. Oh,
no, she
I
will
absolutely
been reunited.
believe they're sat there now.
And let's go on with more of the papers. The Daily Telegraph shares a black and white image of the Queen, along with one of her famous quotes: "Grief is the price we pay for love." And again, that's a shot from a photo shoot, which I think is going to be very iconic in lovely soft focus. The Daily Mail, they've gone with a picture of the Queen as a much younger woman, as Princess Elizabeth, and the line, "Our hearts are broken." Well, as the new king takes the stage, he will be accompanied by his wife of many years and Queen Consort Camilla, and their marriage is one of his great constants, and the support she provides will be particularly vital in the coming days. But her place with him certainly hasn't always been secure, neither has her official position. Well, Felix Forbes has more right now on Camilla and her life in the spotlight.
She is the love of the king's life, the woman he has always returned to. Born Camilla Rosemary Shand, it has been a long journey to the nation's affections. She first met her now husband at a polo game, reportedly with the icebreaker that her great-grandmother had been his great-great-grandfather's mistress. Later blamed for the breakup of His Majesty's union with Princess Diana, she was the famous third person in their marriage. Amid vitriol, their relationship was made public just a year after the princess died. Despite marrying Charles in 2005, it seemed unlikely she'd ever take a full position in the family. But a quiet dedication to service ever since that day, mixed in with her love of the odd joke, haven't just softened her image, they have transformed it. Final confirmation of her position came from the Queen herself, saying it was her sincere wish that when the time comes, Camilla will be known as Queen Consort. She now takes her place, where she has always been, at her husband's side.
Well, as the nation mourns for Her Majesty, the country begins to adapt to a new monarch. You've heard that we will call him King Charles III and she Queen Consort Camilla. The King will hold an audience with the Prime Minister of his trust today, and he is preparing to make his first televised address to the nation. We believe this should be around 6 o'clock tonight. We're joined now live by the journalist and biographer of Charles, Tom Bauer. Tom, good morning. You've written that biography of the new King. Briefly, what are you expecting from him? Do you think this is a seminal moment? Do you believe he will step up to the plate? What do you believe his reign will encompass, sir?
Well, I think there's a lot to play for. I think he has a struggle in a way to make sure the monarchy can survive in the way that it did under the Queen. I mean, her reign was, as you've been saying this morning, absolutely astonishing. If I may say so, I was watching her coronation in 1953 on a tiny black and white screen. It was an extraordinary event. But Charles will not have the same sort of privilege of a coronation where hundreds of thousands are lining London streets as his mother did. He comes to this throne amid controversy, not least because of his relationship with Camilla, but also about his many controversial sayings and activities over the past 50 years. So I think he has a major job to restore trust and keep trust in the monarchy and in himself. He has obviously been preparing for this moment for many years, but when it actually has come, it's going to be very difficult to step up. And I do fear that there will be a lot of criticism once the huge and rightful emotion about the Queen's death has passed, whether we can show the same devotion to the monarchy in Charles as we did to the Queen. And that is going to be his great challenge. He'll address it today. The speech he's making tonight has been rewritten so many times over the past years, as has his oath at the coronation, and what he's going to do in the period immediately after the period of mourning. I anticipate he'll quickly tour the nation to show that he is the rightful king and someone who can carry on from his mother's astonishing achievements. It won't be easy. Do not in any way underestimate that Prince Charles, King Charles now, has a huge job to secure the affections of the nation, because his past has not endeared him to many, and he is not the same as the Queen. He is not the same, unfortunately, as Prince William. But, you know, we all hope, because we are monarchists, and we do hope the monarchy survives, that he does succeed in his endeavours.
Tom, there's no doubt, obviously, there's never been any scandal surrounding the Queen at all. She's been without controversy, and that's one of the reasons why she is held in such respect and love and admiration, not just in Britain, but around the world. And you touched on some of the issues that have touched on the Prince of Wales in his life, and we've had stories on the front pages of newspapers recently, and, of course, going all the way back to the breakup of his marriage to Diana and, of course, what happened post-Diana's death. But we do know that also what Diana called the firm, that does sort of close ranks ranks at these times. And it was very clear, wasn't it, from the Jubilee, when the Queen made that statement that the King Charles would follow and that Camilla would be his Queen consort. She was preparing the country, the world for her passing, for the crown passing to her son. And despite all the talk years ago that the crown could even pass by him and go straight to Prince William, I would have expected, would you not? You've spoken to so many people in the palace that when the ranks are closed and politicians, have put their input in, that actually he will be feted and celebrated in similar ways in the coming weeks, months and years.
Well, I think that over the last 2 or 3 years, Charles has completely reformed himself. He has sought to avoid controversy, and I think that it's been very clever in the way that he has prepared himself for this moment, and Camilla as well, and the Queen. As you rightly say, the firm has worked it out very carefully. The problem is that there's a history. One hopes that the preparations have been will be successful, but it's no mistake and no coincidence that we see a lot more of the Cambridges, of Kate and William, who are the face of the modern monarchy, much more now than before, and rightly so. We want the monarchy to succeed. It is the essence that glues this country together. The heads of state and everything associated with the monarchy is what makes Britain unique in the world. And we now rely on King Charles. And I must say also on the new Prince of Wales, William, because they embody, we hope, the best values of Britain. And the Queen, in her wisdom, decided to swallow her antagonism, which is well known, towards Camilla, and recognize the change. And she wanted to support Camilla and Charles in the new monarchy, and she paved the way outstandingly by that recognition.
Tom,
I must say,
Tom, I just want to jump in and say thank you, sir. We've so much to try and cram in this morning, but very much appreciate your comments. Panel, it's interesting, Charles's challenge. Tom saying, he's got a history. I think that every single member of the royal family in the very different world we now live, and let's not be specific today, but we know about Andrew, we know about Harry and Meghan. I think there is far more known, reported and criticisms aware of all of them. I actually think the firm, as you said, will gather together. I think it is Charles's right to rule. I do think he's changed, opened up. I think she is absolutely central to that. And Rupert, I think the guy is going to do what he's wanted, or rather has been preparing and is his right for all of his life. And I think we should support him and wish him the best.
And I think he will want... Well, he knows he's got to step up to the plate, and just as Tom was mentioning there. But more importantly, actually, he has got a legacy that, particularly through the Prince's Trust, people who have come across him and those kind of situations say he is genuinely caring. It's not faked, it is out there. Yes, of course, there have been controversies, but at the heart of it, he's in absolutely the right place. And we've got to get used to his style of being our monarch. And yes, we've got to forget and hope there aren't anything else that comes out, but ultimately, his heart is in the right place, and Camilla has been integral to that.
Completely agree.
Sarah, can I bring you in there? There have been moves towards republicanism in certain other Commonwealth countries. Queen is not just our head of state of 14 other countries. We've seen it in Australia, because we saw a lot of this stuff playing out when we saw the TV series The Crown, which I think we all thought we'd had that behind-the-scenes look at what was going on. How much was factual, how much was fiction, who knows? But a lot of countries, a lot of people in those other countries talking about how, out of respect for the Queen, they didn't want to become republics, but now the Queen has passed. There may be some move there. That may be one of the first challenges in the coming months that Prince Charles faces.
And actually, becoming head of the Commonwealth wasn't automatic. It wasn't a guaranteed. But the Queen had put that in place.
Yeah.
She had spoken to the members of the Commonwealth, her Commonwealth family, which has meant so much to her over the course of her reign.
And it's an important part of our soft power around the world.
Yes. But I think that there was also a pragmatism about this. If you remember last year, the Prince of Wales, as he was then, travelled to Barbados as it removed the Queen as head of state and became a republic. And it was done with the Queen's blessing. And he stood there alongside Rihanna as that moment happened. yes, this is a time of reckoning, and it will lead to many questions about the future, not just for our country, but for all of those 14 realms.
A couple of things here. First, on the points about the sort of Commonwealth and the possible sort of breakdown of that, if you look at how the Queen dealt with any sort of criticism, there was a time in New Zealand where she had eggs thrown at her and immediately turned around and said, you know, I prefer my New Zealand eggs for breakfast. Which was absolutely superb. But back to your point, Rupert, about Charles, I totally agree that this is the moment that he's been preparing for. This is the moment he was born for.
Yeah.
And with the protocol as it has been, he's taken a back seat deliberately while the Queen has been the monarch. He, as the new monarch, I think we're going to see a lot more of him front and centre, giving us his opinion, giving us, showing us, you know, how he is as a human being. And I think we're going to start to see a much more, the much more human side of him, which does exist.
It was a back seat, but actually what he was criticised for was speaking out, wasn't
But
it?
if he didn't speak out, he'd been criticised and be told that he'd done nothing. I think that's... Sorry, we're going to talk, aren't we, about the global reaction, if we can.
And again, bearing in mind the most famous woman in the world, and indeed, as I say, head of state of not just our country, but 14 others. Well, the death of Her Majesty the Queen has sparked a truly global reaction. Tributes have poured in from across the Atlantic, with President Joe Biden declaring that Queen Elizabeth II defined an era. Look, let's take a look.
Queen Elizabeth II died peacefully at her castle in Scotland this afternoon at the age of 96.
Betroffen vom Tod von Queen Elizabeth II.
엘리자베스 2세 영국 여왕의 장례 절차는 앞으로 열흘간 진행됩니다.
Le drapeau de Buckingham Palace qui est en berne. Alors c'est assez incroyable de vivre ça.
Ja, idag så vaknar ju britterna upp till en helt ny verklighet.
Llegó a ser reina esa niña llamada Lilibet por la familia más cercana.
Let's go over to the States right now, where royal reporter Kinsey Schofield is. She joins us live from LA. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you. I just wanted to tell you I'm so sorry for your loss. The whole world feels it, and you know what an incredible woman, an incredible legacy she led, and an incredible reflection on you.
Yeah, well, it is extraordinary, isn't it? The impact this has had around the world, and the impact on the news in the States, and I think actually a very beautiful reaction from Joe Biden, the American president, taking all of the American flags down to half-mast.
Yes, it is the rare occasion where you'll see somebody like Putin, Trump, and Biden all melt because they cannot resist acknowledging that this woman's legacy is something that we can all agree on.
I ask you, Kinsey, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. The Queen met 13 US presidents, and the British people have always been led to believe that the Americans were or are obsessed with the monarchy, with the pomp and the ceremony. And without getting into discussions about other members of the royal family who currently abide in California, what would the average American say about Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II? What would their defining description of her be, do you think?
Well, I do think that Americans thought of her as very gentle, almost grandmother-like. She was a member of our family almost. But we love the choreography. We love the wardrobe. We do love the pomp and ceremony. She was so graceful and stoic and comforting. And we're all feeling this loss. I've never imagined a world without her, and it's hard to process the idea of that we woke up and we didn't have her. Can I show you? This is my bust. This is from the 1953 coronation. But I mean, this is just something I have in my home. Obviously, I admire her. We just absolutely love her.
And it is extraordinary, isn't it, how much of an iconic figure she's been around the world. I think one of the things that was really interesting is when President Trump came over on a state visit here to the UK, and him going to sort of inspect the guard.
Well, he got it wrong, didn't he?
Of course he got it wrong. He walked ahead of the Queen. Everyone knows you're not supposed to do that. No. But what was wonderful was she was this tiny little terribly old lady, and she held, well, I mean, I'd say rather more dignity. But the fact that this little old lady, as she would appear, actually held such power and held you know, the most powerful man in the world in her thrall, and that's the effect she has.
Well, we've been telling the story over here about her friendship with Ronald Reagan and how he went over to Windsor. They were both on horses, both comfortable on horses, but personality-wise very opposite. He's an entertainer. He wants to engage with people, very similar to Trump. And they're on their horses, and she thinks that they're just going to do, you know, a little drive-by, and everybody's going to get a nice shot. And Reagan, you know, runs over to the media on his horse and wants to engage in conversation and is like, come on over here. And you saw her hesitate for a second, but she did engage because she did like Ronald Reagan and she enjoyed his company. And she was out of her comfort zone there for a minute, but they respected each other immensely, and it was important to them that the other had success. And so we've been watching that footage around here in the States of them on the horses. She came out to America. I believe she went to a Santa Barbara ranch, but she was such a unique character, and I think we are all missing her greatly today.
Thank you, Kinsey, so much for an American perspective. We'll get more from across the world. Thank you for joining us this morning. Team, we do this and we'll do it throughout the day and the next few days here on Talk. It's interesting to hear what she meant globally, isn't it, Sarah?
Yes, it is. And as I was listening to Kinsey, I was thinking about the Obamas and that extraordinary friendship that was struck up between Barack and Michelle Obama and the Queen. And there was that image when they came on their first state visit and Michelle Obama put her arm around the Queen and was then told, well, that's not protocol. But she had said that she learned with the Queen it wasn't about formality or protocol, it was about humanity. And that is what the Queen stood for.
It's a great word, Rupert, isn't it? Humanity.
Yeah, and she had that, and just innate. She just knew how to deal with the great and also her public. And she never didn't matter who she was talking to.
I get the impression, actually, a lot of people get offended on her behalf, and actually she was absolutely fine. But Colin, you were an equerry to the Queen Mother. You would have seen what happens and goes on behind the scenes. We talked a lot this morning about the plans for the funeral ahead, and talking about that international global reaction. One of the reasons why these things take a lot of time and to put together is the huge number of heads of state who will be wanting to attend this event and will be invited to this event, from the most powerful man in the world right now, Joe Biden, to European allies and Commonwealth leaders around the world. Getting all of these people in one place at one time is a huge undertaking.
It's a massive undertaking. And let's not forget, within the first 24 hours of D-Day is the Accession Council.
Explain D-Day again for people who just tuned in.
D-Day is the day which is deemed to be the death of the monarch. And as we were talking earlier, is that yesterday or is it today?
We think it'll be today, don't we?
We probably think it's today from an administrative purpose. Yep. But then within the first 24 hours after the monarch's death, the Accession Council meets, which is the Privy Council, 700-odd members of Privy Council, including members of the Commonwealth. It's a huge undertaking.
Logistical nightmare.
Logistical nightmare, especially as they're supposed to be meeting in a place that can only hold 150 people. So, again, how that gets prioritised is going to be a bit of a logistic nightmare.
The etiquette.
It's like a political... You imagine when you have G7s, it all goes around... There's more going on here than just meets the eye.
And this is another reason.
This is another
reason why we keep talking about why is this mourning going to be 10 or 12 days? Yep. Because there's not just a funeral and all those logistics. There's so much to organise. And as you say, can I just explain to people what you were saying about that D-Day? The reason we reckon it will be +1 is because Charles today, King Charles now, and the Queen Consort will travel down from Balmoral to London. Then he'll meet Earl Marsh, as you said, the Duke of Norfolk, who will organise the funeral. So there's a delay, isn't there,
and
to
this
a day,
is all
really.
related to Operation London Bridge. And we've got the details. A few years ago, it was all published. The long-standing plans...
It had been very shrouded in secrecy for many years.
And the Queen Majesty's body needs to go to Buckingham Palace, needs to go to Westminster Hall, it needs to go back to St George's Chapel.
And St George's Chapel in Windsor,
and of course,
this
is just the 10 days for this country. Then there is the ongoing changes that we're going to need to see. Banknotes. It's police uniforms. It's the uniforms.
How many boxes?
It's the uniforms of all of the Commonwealth countries, New Zealand, Canada, who have the Queen's crown on.
Yeah.
That's going to need to change.
Soldiers.
Absolutely, it's going to need to change to the King's crown.
Can I ask about a state funeral quickly, briefly, guys? how many people do we imagine will be at this funeral? It won't just be heads of state. There'll be members of staff,
charity,
charity representation, all sorts of people. Do we know numbers at all?
We don't know numbers at this stage, and actually we have to look back to the death of the King to see anything on this scale, because the Queen Mother had a royal ceremonial funeral, not a state funeral.
I never understood that, but that's for another day.
But it will be on a huge scale. It has all been planned with military precision, and there's a huge role for the military. We'll see that being rehearsed.
As many as you can get into the church for the day. And I don't know how many you can get.
And if it is a weekday for people just tuning in, that will be a bank holiday. Am I right in saying that?
It won't take place on a Sunday. If it is
Which is why we believe, but we're not giving this out as information, we believe it might be around the 19th.
Monday the 19th.
That's what we're saying. But throughout the day here on Talk, as we get that information, we will, of course, share it with you. It's approaching 9 o'clock. It is Friday the 9th of September, the day we wake up to the end of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, and we have a new king, Charles III. Let's get the latest headlines now from our news team.
Good morning, I'm Zora Suleiman. King Charles III is set to address the nation today for the first time as monarch, following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. In the last half an hour, talkTV understands the Duke of Sussex has left Balmoral after travelling to be by her bedside. It's believed the royal family spent the night at the Scottish estate, where Buckingham Palace said the Queen died peacefully yesterday afternoon. The King and his wife Camilla, now Queen Consort, are also expected to return to London soon for his first address to the nation and his first audience with the new Prime Minister. He's also set to confirm the carefully planned schedule for the Queen's funeral and the coming days. Well, at midday today, gun salutes are set to ring out in London and bells toll around the country to mark the Queen's death. And Parliament will also start 2 days of special tributes. Hundreds of people have laid flowers and gathered at the gates of Buckingham Palace this morning to pay tribute to the Queen. talkTV spoke to Paul Burrell, the former royal butler to Her Majesty, who told us it would take time for the country to come to terms with the news.
The woman herself, I was very lucky from an early age to be shaped and inspired by an incredible human being. And I just don't know what the country is going to be like without her. It'll never be the same.
Crowds were also seen at Windsor, the Queen's former official residence, and worldwide tributes have poured in for the Queen, with the Dalai Lama the latest to pay his respects, saying he was praying for her and offering condolences to King Charles. The Queen was head of state of the UK and 14 other countries, including Canada and New Zealand. Their Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, called the monarch extraordinary, whilst US President Joe Biden signed a book of condolence at the British Embassy in Washington as a tribute. And as a mark of respect, stores are set to close and events across the country will be cancelled. A decision is expected later on if this weekend's football games will be postponed. While several concerts and gigs have been called off, the final night of the proms and last night's Mercury Prize ceremony were also cancelled. And at his show in Toronto, Sir Elton John made this touching tribute.
She led the country through some of our greatest and darkest moments with grace, decency and genuine care and warmth. I'm 75, she's been with me all my life, and I feel very sad that she won't be with me anymore.
And now back to Jeremy and Julia in the studio.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning and welcome back to Talk TV Breakfast, and welcome to our extended coverage of the sad death of Queen Elizabeth II. Now, Britain this morning is now having to get used to something that has seemed almost unthinkable for so long: life without our beloved Queen. I keep saying this, but anyone under the age of 70, the vast majority of the people of this country, have never known any other monarch. Her Majesty was a constant in our lives, and her death yesterday afternoon remains a deep shock and leaves our nation, Julia, today in mourning, quite rightly.
Yeah, indeed, and today is also a new dawn for the monarchy. We now have a new king, Charles III, and Britain has a new Queen Consort, Camilla. Well, as the nation comes to terms with the loss, let's take a quick look back at the Queen's remarkable life.
Born April the 21st, 1926, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary became Queen Elizabeth II in 1952, following the death of her father, King George VI, wife to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, and a mother to Prince Charles and Princess Anne. In the 60s, Queen Elizabeth gave birth to 2 more children, balancing family with her formal role as head of Commonwealth and head of state. Over the decades, the Queen and the royals have faced a series of challenges and tragedies.
It has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
None more so than the death of Princess Diana. In recent years, repeated crises and controversies have threatened the monarchy. Most recently, the scandal surrounding her son, Prince Andrew. But throughout, the Queen remained hugely popular and helped to steer the nation through some of its most testing times, including the pandemic.
We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Her Majesty's own health came under the spotlight when, in October 2021, she spent a night in hospital. A few months later, she tested positive for COVID and was forced to cancel a string of engagements and appearances. In recent months, worsening mobility problems led to her pulling out of a number of key events, including the state opening of Parliament. For the first time in 59 years, she missed the speech and, in an historic change of protocol, granted powers to her son and heir, Prince Charles.
Her Majesty looks forward to the celebrations taking place across the United Kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth.
But until the end, she continued, when health would allow, to uphold her appearances, often with her family by her side. In April 2022, Queen Elizabeth reached the remarkable age of 96 and achieved the major historical milestone of 70 years on the throne. With her Platinum Jubilee marked by celebrations and commemorations up and down the country. Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth carried out more than 30,000 royal engagements in 110 countries, seen the rise and fall of 15 prime ministers, and became patron of more than 600 charities. She leaves behind 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren, along with an unrivalled legacy of Britain's longest-serving monarch.
Well, let's look at some of the morning's front pages now, and of course you could guess what is on the front pages. They're all paying tribute to Her Majesty. Let's start with The Sun newspaper. The Sun features a black and white photograph of the Queen and says, "We loved you, Ma'am," very much reflecting the mood of the nation. That beautiful photograph on the front page. But, Jeremy, on the back page, a much younger
beautiful.
Queen.
Well, King Charles III's statement from last night and a much younger picture of Her Majesty. I don't know, maybe sort of 50, 56, 57, but both ages and a great wraparound. And 30 pages, a 30-page tribute inside. Fantastic coverage in the Sun today, I have to
absolutely.
say.
And the Times, of course, also has a very special edition this morning reflecting the Queen's life in service and is wrapped in a memorable cover dedicated to the monarch. Inside, though, this iconic picture of the Queen, also the same pictures on the front of the Sun. The Daily Mail as well goes with a picture of the Queen as Princess Elizabeth, much younger, and the line, "Our hearts are broken." Because, Jeremy, every single paper has these pictures. And again, newspapers will have prepared for years these obituaries. But when the news finally comes, it is always a shock.
It is, and I hope you don't mind, I read this last hour, but I want to read it again. Back to the Times. On the back, if I can just show you that, on the back cover, there's an amazing quote from the Queen's Christmas broadcast in 1957. She says, "I cannot lead you into battle. I do not give you laws or administer justice, but I can do something else. I can give you my heart and my devotion to these old islands and to all the peoples of our brotherhood of nations," which I think sums up an amazing woman in the most wonderful way there in the Times. It's emerged as well this morning that she died at her beloved Balmoral yesterday afternoon with her son Charles and eldest daughter Princess Anne at her bedside. Other members of the royal family, including the Princes William Andrew and Edward had dashed to Scotland, but sadly did not make it. We saw those pictures in the last half hour. Prince Harry becoming the first senior royal Julia to leave Balmoral, having also failed to see the Queen before she died. Now, joining us outside Balmoral is Oliver, our talkTV correspondent. Oliver, briefly, please. We saw Harry leave. Any other movement, any other news in the last hour?
No other news in the last half hour, apart from that departure by Prince Harry, leaving in one of 2 Range Rovers. Now, we know that he flew into Aberdeen Airport by himself. He had been in Dusseldorf with his wife, Meghan. They were there to mark the 1 year just ahead of the next Invictus Games. And so I suppose now there's going to be huge speculation as to where he has gone, whether that is to go and see Meghan again. Has she arrived in the country? Of course, we know that there has been a falling out, a disagreement about their position within the family, and that was the reason that they decided to leave. But as of yet, we've had no confirmation as to where that car is going, or indeed whether Harry will be returning here with his wife, Meghan.
Much indeed, Oliver. More from you later. This morning has naturally seen a huge outpouring of love and sadness after the passing of Her Majesty. Crowds have gathered at royal palaces across the country as mourners, quite rightly, I think, gather to pay tribute to their beloved Queen. A silent vigil was held by members of the public outside Buckingham Palace last night. Already, we're seeing huge amounts of flowers being laid. I talked about how my young son went to Windsor Castle, 2.5, with his mother yesterday and laid flowers. talkTV's correspondent Jessica King was outside BP last night and again this morning, and we talked about that mood shift, that mood change, and people, it'll become a symbol, Buckingham Palace, and people will flock, won't they, Jessica?
Absolutely. Well, since dawn this morning, as the light was breaking, people were arriving here at Buckingham Palace to lay their flowers, to lay personal tributes, teddy bears, flags, even football tops. I mean, people really want to come and pay their respects here and just show how much the monarch meant to them. We're down on the Mall now, and just I can see behind me lots of people walking down towards Buckingham Palace carrying flowers. So I think this is just going to continue all day with people coming down here to pay their respects and have a moment here at this iconic Buckingham Palace, of course, synonymous with the Queen and the monarchy.
Thank you very much indeed there, Jessica. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, will lead tributes to the Queen today. MPs will gather in the House of Commons from noon to make their own statements about her passing and pay tributes, and also to pledge an oath of allegiance to King Charles III. Of course, every MP must first pledge an oath of allegiance to the Queen before taking their seat. There'll be another session for parliamentary tributes tomorrow, and as Parliament holds a very rare Saturday sitting. Well, joining us right now to tell us more about how Westminster will pay tribute is former Deputy Prime Minister to Theresa May. That's Sir David Lidington. Good morning to you, Sir David. I wish we were speaking to you under happier circumstances, but you, of course, Deputy Prime Minister and also, you know, Privy Councillor, obviously, you're all in the Cabinet. What are your memories of the Queen?
The first time I met the Queen on my own, I was the new Lord President of the Council when Theresa May formed her government, so it went with Leader of the House of Commons. And before the monthly Privy Council meeting with Her Majesty at Buckingham Palace, the Lord President would go in on his own to give her papers for the meeting and just chat for as long or short a time as she wanted to chat. And I remember absolutely was shaking first time I went in, the first time I'd ever been one-to-one with the Queen. And the doors closed behind me. The equerry, her military aide, who was accompanying me in for the bow and the introduction, reversed out, door shut, and this sort of sense of panic goes through you. Are my shoelaces done up properly? Too late to check. She was the Queen, and she just put everybody at their ease. And I think one thing that I noticed, you know, both meeting her privately on a fair number of occasions, but also seeing her on public show at big events, is that she knew that many people meeting her would be nervous. She knew that for most of the people whom she met, this would probably be the only time that they met her or saw her in the flesh. And so she would try to make it special for them. And once a year, there's a big reception at Buckingham Palace for all the ambassadors and high commissioners in London. They're all invited to bring their husbands or wives, and they're invited to bring any adult children who are with them. And they're all lined up around the perimeter of sort of 4 rooms in Buckingham Palace, and the Queen would go with other members of the royal family around, meeting them individually, with a story, an anecdote for almost every country represented. I noticed, watching this one, how she would make a point of having greeted the ambassador and their spouse, then leaning across where there were some children in their perhaps late teens, early 20s present, and talking to them. And I would guess asking them about what they were doing in life, what they were planning to do, what their aspirations were. And you could see the smiles on the faces of these young men and women. And it was this attention to trying to make this a special moment for everybody whom she met. That just one of the attributes, I think, that made her such an outstanding constitutional monarch. It was part of a service ethic that
So, David,
went very, very deep.
I think that's so well put, because I think her human touch and her ability to transcend the word we've been using all morning, all people from wherever they were in the world and whatever their background, was the most amazing thing about her. I just wanted to ask you constitutionally, we've information as it's coming in today that the new King Charles III will travel south from Balmoral with the Queen Consort Camilla. He'll meet Earl Marshall, the Duke of Norfolk, about the funeral arrangements. He'll also meet with the Privy Council. What will that involve? Is that just current Privy Councillors, or are you a Privy Councillor for life? What will happen in that meeting today with the new King?
What I expect is that this will be a meeting of, if you like, the working Privy Council, that will be of senior ministers from the present government, and that suggests to me that some of the business which Queen Elizabeth was not able to complete during her lifetime, swearing in a number of new members of the cabinet as members of the Privy Council, will take place then. The Justice Secretary, Brandon Lewis, is new to the job. They have to take a special oath as Lord Chancellor with their hand on the Great Seal of England. It's different from the oaths that other ministers take. So I think there will be that business to do. And then at some stage, probably over the weekend, we expect there to be what's called the Accession Council that takes place when a sovereign dies and is succeeded by the new king or queen, and that to that a larger number of Privy Councillors would expect to be summoned, and that is a ceremonial, a formal occasion to take note of the change of monarch and to hear from the new king, and after that the new king's titles and assumption of the throne would be formally proclaimed by the herald. Those figures you see in ceremonial, very ornate tabards costumes at some of the state occasions, and at various locations around London and elsewhere in the country.
Thank you so much indeed, Sir David Lidington. Great personal recollection there of time with Her Majesty. Now, as Britain enters a period of national mourning, a number of events have been cancelled. These information's just come in, hasn't it, Julia? The Football League has called off a number of fixtures, whilst prom concerts were also scrapped. Broadcasters have changed their schedules, with the BBC deciding not to show any comedy programmes during the next 10 days.
Well, we're now joined by our panel, talkTV's political editor Kate McCann, the royal commentator Angela Levin joins us once again, and of course talkTV's royal editor Sarah Hewson. And Sarah, there is a lot more information coming in hour by hour about what is going to happen. What's the latest you're hearing?
We're getting some more guidance from Buckingham Palace about some of the protocols that will be put in place over the coming days. So we've had an update which says, following the death of Her Majesty the Queen, it is His Majesty the King's wish that a period of royal mourning is observed from now until 7 days after the Queen's funeral. The date of the funeral to be confirmed in due course, so we haven't got confirmation of that yet.
What is royal mourning?
Royal mourning is a period of mourning observed by members of the royal household, members of the royal family, troops, those on official duties. So we will see engagements cancelled, for example. They will be wearing black. Flags at royal residences, we saw them go to half-mast yesterday. That will continue until 8 o'clock the day after the final day of royal mourning. There'll be a royal gun salute in London at 1 o'clock today, in Hyde Park by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, and at the Tower of London by the Honourable Artillery Company. 1 round, as we were discussing earlier, fired for every year of the Queen's life.
96 of those.
96 rounds. And there's also some guidance which may be of interest to those watching and listening to us about people wanting to lay flowers. So at Buckingham Palace, members of the public are being guided to lay their floral tributes to sites in Green Park or Hyde Park. Those flowers that we're starting to see outside Buckingham Palace were going to be moved.
I think that's really... You're going to agree with me, aren't you, Angela Levin? I think that's really sad. I think the iconic thing should them all up the gates. I'll never forget that.
Well, it's very interesting because when Prince Philip died, they told people not to leave flowers anywhere because, of course, the COVID was around and they shouldn't do that. Took absolutely no
People did
notice.
it anyway. Yeah.
Yes, and quite right too. You want to link yourself.
You don't really want to go to Green Park, do you, if you're trying to leave?
I imagine it's just the sheer quantity of flowers that are being expected. Windsor Castle, again, it's Cambridge Gate on the Long Walk, which is where we saw the flowers being left for the Duke of Edinburgh. Sandringham Estate, leave them at the Norwich gates. Balmoral Castle florals left at the main gate. We've already seen that happening over the course of
I think the one thing, and I'd like to bring Kate McCann in, our political editor, I think one of the things that's really interesting about this whole process is the British public will want to mourn and they'll want to be able to outpour the grief. Politically, of course, what an extraordinary week. 2 days ago, the Queen touches hands with Liz Truss and the 15th Prime Minister that gets given that honour from her, and it was almost as if, Kate, she had to or wanted to get that done somehow. We talked about that earlier. But also for Liz Truss, a seismic sort of entry into the world of Number 10, isn't it?
It's absolutely huge. I mean, the plans that Sarah's talking about for the funeral and what will happen next over the course of 10 days, that's been planned for a long time. But new ministers in office are going to have to take part in those proposals, and they won't have rehearsed because they've only just been appointed. And in fact, in some cases, they haven't, as David Lidington was saying there, been fully appointed because they have to pledge to a seal and they haven't been able to do that. So this is a really high-pressure time for any new Prime Minister, but for a new Prime Minister to then have to come in and deal with this, it's exceptional. It's unheard of.
I thought she did a really good speech. I thought it was...
Well, it just hit the tone.
It came across well,
It's a very difficult tone, isn't it? Because especially for a new Prime Minister, you can't be all about you.
No.
It needs to be about the people we are focused on. You talk about a nation in mourning, but I think also just a nation wanting to show their respects.
Absolutely
I think that's a very important part of it. And there's no doubt at all, as we saw this with the Queen Mother's death, Kate, and of course with Diana's death so many years ago in 1997, actually often it is the politicians who step in, a lot of the senior civil servants, the Cabinet Secretary, they liaise very closely. We know it was you were in the House of Commons watching from the press gallery when the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition were both given that information by Nadeem Sahawi, but also it is the Cabinet Secretary who's passed on a message from the Queen's staff to tell the Prime Minister the very sad news.
Do we know what those notes said? Have we got anything on that? Because I'm fascinated whether it told the Prime Minister that the Queen was either seriously ill or had passed away. Do we have anything on that?
So they weren't formal notes. It wasn't a dictated note from the palace. It was a note written on the one side by Nadeem Zahawi and on the other side by a Labour frontbencher, which were passed to Keir Starmer. And my understanding is that it was news that the Queen was unwell at that point in time. But you could see from the look on Liz Truss, the Prime Minister's face, you know, the colour drained from it. And in that circumstance, when you are announcing a multi-billion-pound policy, all your attention really is focused on what you're doing. And you could tell nobody in the chamber was listening. And what was fascinating and unfortunate, given the scale of the announcement, was that it just rippled up the benches, this sense of shock. And even in the press gallery, you know, people were looking around at one another.
And it was unprecedented for information to come out. And again, it was 12:10-ish, I think, when people realised this note had been passed. And my understanding from what I've heard is that the note did say that it was thought that the Queen was unlikely to recover, which is why there was such a shocked reaction.
But also,
it wasn't just that she was
But
unwell.
also politically, which is fascinating. And we need to say this. Liz Truss was standing up and dealing with something that is, I mean, central to every single person's life in this country, this energy crisis. And yet, in whatever way you put this,
That's there now.
I do wonder what would have happened, actually, the way the business sort of ends, if she hadn't already made that statement, given that the country waiting for the Tory leadership to end.
That question is open
moment.
because that statement does not in itself solve the problem. It requires legislation, and we are now in a period where Parliament
They can't pass any.
Well, technically they can.
Okay.
Parliament can. There is a threshold where the government can decide that something is so pressing that they do need to legislate. For the course of the next 2 days, it will be tributes in Parliament. But that is a big decision for Liz Truss to make. And some people will disagree either way.
Yeah, people are going to be unhappy either way, aren't they? You can't do wrong for
Either
doing
way,
right, Angela.
it's one of those things where you can't win because people will go against you if you do and if you don't.
The rise, presumably the rise was October the 1st.
It has to be done. It has to be legislated before then. Otherwise, these changes won't come.
You're absolutely right. Some people will go, what about the energy crisis? And others will say, how disrespectful the Queen has just done.
But I do think it's strange. I mean, look, people can show love and respect and be in mourning, but not expect the country to come to a standstill.
Well, she wouldn't want that, the Queen,
No,
would
exactly.
she?
It was interesting, actually, last night, just after the very sad news, I made my way up to an event for my daughter's school, and the head teacher, she started the presentation by saying, we did think about cancelling this event, but the Queen was about stoicism, getting on with the job. And Angela, you've spoken to so many royals. You did a biography of Prince Harry, of the youngest. You've also just written a biography of Camilla, who's about to be our new, well, we say Queen Consort. She's going to be the new Queen, is she not? And she has certainly echoed an awful lot of that, the Queen's stoicism over the years, hasn't she?
Yes, she's very stoic and she has never complained. She's never come out and said it's unfair. With the attacks from people that she was the most ugly and worst woman in the world, and from the press where she was absolutely hounded. And she couldn't go out for many months, and she got a friend to buy things from the local supermarket because she wasn't engaged to Prince Charles, and therefore she had no protection whatsoever.
How important will she be for Charles in the next few days and weeks, Angela?
I think she will be extremely important at supporting him and making him feel that he's got the courage to take this enormous burden on his shoulders. But on the other hand, she will make him laugh. They've got a great sense of humour. And thirdly, she will, when she's on her own doing engagements, because she's always been determined to carry on with these, especially related to things like domestic violence and rape and those things, which Charles would never touch, so she would never be treading on his area.
She has certainly some personal work. I think it's quite interesting, Sarah, if I can bring you in. A lot of people have criticised Camilla. There's definitely been a change and a shift in public opinion.
An evolution, yes.
And I said it earlier, it's just my opinion. I think that she's probably the best thing that's happened to him, and I think that she will be there with him.
You said earlier, if you're going to have a king, rather he was someone who was happy, and there's no doubt at all he and Diane have been very unhappy. But the way that she has been rehabilitated and the acceptance of many staunch royalists who were very opposed, not just to her marrying the future king and being on the throne, but even him. There was a time when there was big discussion about whether or not he would even accede to the throne, whether it would pass to William.
Public attitudes have certainly shifted over the years. And I think if you think back to their wedding in 2005 and the discussion about what Camilla's title would be, there was certainly no way that the public would accept her to be a Princess of Wales. She became the Duchess of Cornwall.
But it was interesting that the Queen made that statement at the Jubilee, making it very clear, didn't she, Angela, that she was going to...
We had a gentleman on earlier, Paul Burrell, who said that he will never accept her and people will not. I'm sorry, I completely disagree with that. Yes,
but actually Prince Philip came round. He disapproved of it. He felt it was very wrong. But actually, in the end, he said... the leader needs support, and if he has got good support, he will do much better. You can't do this job on your own.
You sort of feel he's grown as a person because of her. Do you not think?
But there are an awful lot of controversies, Kate, still surrounding Prince Charles. Some of our national newspapers are publishing stories only in recent weeks about controversies about the funding of some of his charities, so his closest aides being interviewed by the police over issues. He has been plagued by controversies over the years in a way that the Queen certainly never has. Do you think that this is going to play out, or do you think we're going to see a situation where both the palace, the aides, the politicians as well, the government will play a crucial role, I suppose, just surround and protect him?
I think there are questions about his political views, and there will be questions about those stories, which have, of course, been denied. But I think there's also going to be a marked difference in the way that he fulfills the role now that he is king. And, you know, people around him have said he recognises that very clearly. He understands that, and he's going to take it on in that vein.
Well, we were talking earlier, when you weren't here, about how... My opinion is he spent all of these years knowing that that's his destiny, and if he doesn't speak out, then he's nothing, and if he did, then, you know, he's interfering. I actually believe the essence of Great Britain is that constitutional monarchy. I can't even say it. And I think that I mean, whether he might say it in private, we're not going to hear. Those are audiences with the Prime Minister.
Well, it has
we're not
to stop
going to have
constitutionally.
Absolutely.
Crucial that it does.
But the interesting thing will be we have a new Prime Minister and a new King at the same time. And in a way that allows them to set their own tone. Of course, there are the restrictions and the constraints, but neither one of them has been in this position before.
And it is a very different position, isn't it, being the Queen or the head of state or being the heir. Angela, it's very interesting. In the early days of the Queen's reign, I mean, she acceded to the throne at the age of 25, so young. Her father died unexpectedly. She became the heir unexpectedly with the abdication. She always talked about it being about duty and about, you know, never wanting to see anything like the abdication again. But she would be taking advice from elderly men who were her prime ministers in the early years of her reign. In later years, she was the one giving the advice. How do you think it will play out with Prince Charles and Liz Truss as a new king
Dynamic.
and a new prime minister?
Yeah.
I think they will work very well together because they've both waited a long time for their opportunity. And I think they will understand the position that they're both in. And I think she has changed her mind at what she felt like when she was a young woman,
Famously,
when she was anti the monarchy. But she's actually really come round, and I believe that's genuine.
I think that journey is genuine as well. I think
We can all change our views about things. And I think that they will work very, very hard. And if you're determined to make something work, he's not out for fighting and arguing, and he won't do any of that because he'll be very relieved that he's actually become king.
Yeah.
Although with the sadness.
I think that's a really
mother.
important point. And when we talk about Prince Charles and we talk about the controversies and stuff that's still written, I think the one overriding thing about him is he believes in the monarchy and he believes in the continuity, and I think he will do... We can talk about a stripped-down monarchy, we can talk about this, that and the other. Charles wants the monarchy to maintain itself, don't you think?
Let's talk about that stripping down, because he's been playing a crucial role in recent years, hasn't he, Sarah, in terms of actually, you know, taking all the sort of the extra royals out and having it very focused on... And when we saw the balcony scene at the end of the Platinum Jubilee, it was that pared-down monarchy, wasn't it?
Yes, and some of that has happened by default anyway, with the departures of the Duke of York and the Duke of Sussex from official royal duties. But yes, that much slimmer monarchy, which, given that we're in a cost of living crisis and questions over taxpayer funding, is more important now than ever.
I think for him, I think that's his... I think for Charles, that is how he defines making the monarchy acceptable or more... Relevant's a great word. And to be fair, I think it's probably the right thing to do.
And we've seen that recent move as well, haven't we, of the now heir to the throne, Prince William and his wife Kate and their 3 children to Windsor, no doubt preparing to move perhaps into Windsor Castle.
I mean, we haven't really talked about Prince William, but now finds himself the direct heir to the throne.
Well, most people wouldn't know this, but the school those kids have just gone to, my kids have been at and just left, and they moved to be near her. But, of course, it will be pretty nailed on, in my opinion, that they'll move into Windsor Castle very soon. That's
what I think one problem will be, and wasn't around when the Queen was much younger, and that is people writing emails and social media being very, very antagonistic against somebody. And I think that we've seen it build up against the person. And I think something should be done about that in general, that you need to have an address and a name before you can actually spout venom.
I've got a real simple theory on that. I just ignore it. Those people aren't worth anything. It is Friday morning, the 9th of September, the day the United Kingdom woke up to the tragic and sad death yesterday of the Queen and a new king, King Charles III. We'll get the latest news headlines from our news team right now.
Good morning, I'm Zora Suleiman. A period of mourning will be observed by members of the royal family and household from now until 7 days after the Queen's funeral. In the last half an hour, Buckingham Palace said in a statement that it is His Majesty the King's wish. Well, the King and his wife Camilla, now Queen Consort, are also expected to return to London soon for his first address to the nation and his first audience with the new Prime Minister. He's also set to confirm the carefully planned schedule and the date of the Queen's funeral, which the palace say will be announced in due course. talkTV understands that the Duke of Sussex has now left Balmoral this morning, where the Queen died peacefully yesterday afternoon. It's believed the royal family spent the night at the Scottish estate. At 1 p.m. today, gun salutes are set to ring out in London and bells toll around the country to mark the Queen's death. And Parliament will also start 2 days of special tributes. Well, hundreds of people have laid flowers and gathered at the gates of Buckingham Palace this morning to pay tribute to the Queen, while further respects have been paid around the country, with flowers and candles laid at Balmoral, Windsor and Sandringham. talkTV spoke to Gavin Ashton, the Queen's former chaplain, who reflected on how important faith was to Her Majesty.
We know her as a kind, cheerful, indomitable, dutiful, humorous and generous person. And these aren't simply attributes that you're born with and keep unpressured through life. They're moral virtues that grow. And her Christian faith is the source of one of the reasons we like her and love her.
And as a mark of respect, some stores are set to close and events across the country will be cancelled. A decision is expected later on whether this weekend's football matches will be postponed after a minute's silence was held at games last night. While several concert and gigs have been called off, the final night of the proms and last night's Mercury Prize ceremony were cancelled. And at his show in Toronto, Sir Elton John made this touching tribute.
She led the country through some of our greatest and darkest moments with grace, decency and a genuine caring warmth. I'm 75, she's been with me all my life, and I feel very sad that she won't live with me anymore.
And now back to Jeremy and Julia in the studio.
Well, Queen Elizabeth II was a history-making monarch, the longest reigning monarch in our history. Her Majesty redefined the role of the royal family in British public life. But what was she like in person? Well, I'm joined live now by her former head of Royal Protection, Di Davies. Good morning to you. I wish it was under happier circumstances to speak to you. But you, the protection officers, perhaps come closest to the royal family more than anybody else, sometimes even knowing them better than their own families. So tell us your memories of the Queen.
Well, a very good morning to both of you. Yes, well, I was privileged to take command back in 1995, where I amalgamated the uniform and the plainclothes division, along with a special escort group, into one. I was fortunate that I inherited the Queen's police officer, but there are a number of those, and I was particularly privileged to have one called Peter Prentice, who had been with the Queen. And that's how it works, really. Each of the senior royals have teams, and they are with them 24/7, wherever they are, at home or in the world, accompanied by the uniform side where it's appropriate and necessary. So in true terms, they were the 24/7 people who had dealings. Clearly, I met her on a number of occasions, and each time I was struck by the awe that surrounded her and her decency, and she wanted to know detail and fact, and she used to cross-examine me once or twice on issues that had arisen, and her eyes were what always struck me. They were beautiful, and like Princess Diana, you just looked into those pools, and they just delighted me, and that's my memory of her, if you like,
that's
along
wonderful.
with sometimes not such a side.
We hear so much also about the Queen's famous sense of humour. I think we didn't really get to see a lot of that until recent years. Famously, of course, the James Bond skydiving into the opening ceremony of the London Olympics. More recently at the Platinum Jubilee, where she appeared in that video, which apparently none of her own family members even knew had been made, with Paddington, where we finally discovered what she kept in her handbag. It turns out it was marmalade sandwiches all along. Tell us a little bit about her sense of humour behind the scenes, because we talk about her making people people feel at ease. But often it was with this very wry, very dry sense of humour, wasn't it?
Well, it was very dry, and I remember one occasion with my wife where she looked at me very puzzled and asked me why I kept putting the big dogs into her garden. I'd just come back from Japan on a mission, and she quizzically asked me, and what it was, the alarms had gone off, and at Buckingham Palace, it's huge, as you know, we used to put the police dogs in to search it. But she couldn't understand it, and frankly was quite annoyed that she was being disturbed. So it was all my fault. But there we are. I took it on the chin and said, well, there are a lot of bad people out there, Ma'am. And she looked at me quizzically. She said, are there? And I said, yes, there are. And occasionally,
great memories. One of the things that sort of comes out, and has done for Julia and I all morning, is that this woman's ability to deal the same with almost everybody, whether they were the king or queen of a country, or whether they were somebody that was driving her, or whatever, one of the footmen, is that she managed to make everybody feel at ease. Despite this huge aura about her, she managed to make everybody feel on a level. That's a real skill, isn't it? And that, for me, is why the Queen and her legacy will continue forever, because she was a remarkable woman, wasn't she?
Well, yes, actually, and I said on a number of channels yesterday, we'll never see the like again. I'm 71 now, and I don't know any other woman who inspires so many different avenues of so many different classes. We all have this huge respect for her. Quite amazing, and I don't think this generation has the equivalent, I'm sad to say.
Completely agree. Di Davis, a former Royal Protection boss for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, who sadly, of course, died yesterday. Thank you so much for joining us. We're back with our panel, Kate, Sarah and Angela. We talked about the challenge for Prince Charles. Let's talk about the British public. They will mourn. They will deal with this in their own way. Do you think, I don't know how to put this, but do you think that the British public's support that is unconditional for the Queen will continue for the new monarchy, the new slimmed-down monarchy?
I do. I think King Charles will do tremendously well, because this is what he cares about. This is what he works, you know, every single day of the year. He goes around seeing people. He helps people who have been on the street to get a job and feel worthwhile. I think that he will also be extremely dignified and very respectful of his mother. And I think he will do a marvellous job, actually.
Sarah, one of the things that we talked about, you know, some of the controversies with Prince Charles, but certainly one of the things that would stand him in people's minds in a very positive way is the Prince's trust. Do we believe that with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have become the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall overnight, they will, when he accedes to the throne, become the Prince and Princess of Wales? Will that mean William takes on the Prince's trust and the Duchy of Cornwall and all those things?
William does. The Prince of Wales does inherit the Duchy of Cornwall. Look, the King can decide to continue his patronages and his charitable engagements, and the Prince's trust is hugely important to him. It has been a very large part of his role.
Would it be called the King's Trust in future?
Well, I don't know, but it will be very interesting to see at 6 o'clock tonight when he makes his address to the nation. He will have spent a long time preparing what he wants to say, the kind of king that he wants to be. And we will get an insight into that.
And we are going to hear a lot of crucial statements. You say 6 o'clock tonight, we expect to have that formal statement from the new king. It will be pre-recorded. It'll be a message to the public. But we're also, Kate McCann, going to hear from many politicians. We were talking earlier from midday today. Normally, MPs would be returning to their constituencies. They've only just come back to Parliament on Monday, ready for the Tory leadership election. And this big statement, of course, we had yesterday that was curtailed by the announcement of the Queen's illness. But we're going to hear from, no doubt, more from Liz Truss and more from Keir Starmer and other leaders. And this will be a very big moment for both of those two people. What's interesting is we've got two major party leaders, both of whom in the past have expressed views that are Republican. But that is going to be a very tricky minefield, I think.
Oh, no, it isn't, because politicians change their mind, don't they, repeatedly?
Well, I think they both gave an indication of the tone that they will strike when they gave their speeches last night. And obviously, Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, did the same thing. Liz Truss will lead those tributes this morning, well, this afternoon, in Parliament as the Prime Minister. But I have absolutely no doubt there'll be some really moving moments in there, because MPs, the mood in the House of Commons, it's so hard to describe. It was like a weight, you know, a real heaviness. And there were some people who looked quite close to tears, even before we knew the news that we thought we would get but didn't want to hear.
You know, when you said yesterday in Parliament you felt it moving, I remember the old man saying to me, because he was at Diana's funeral, because, as you know, he worked for the Queen Mother, and he said they were in Westminster, wherever it was, I think, and Earl Spencer was talking, and that he said you could feel this clap and cheer from outside, from down the Mall, spread all the way in and almost come up the church, and the royals were at the front like that. I think for every single person who lives in this country, whatever their political persuasion, I think this is a huge moment. I wanted to just ask you, the speech at 6 o'clock, is it purely by him, or will there be political input? Does he have to show that to the government? Is that what the conversation with the Prime Minister when he comes down from Balmoral? Is there any involvement there or not?
As far as I'm aware, no, but that... I mean, you would know more than I would.
And I think this is very much the King paying tribute to his mother and setting out to the nation.
I would expect quite different, actually. I would think that very much that the likes of, you know, the close advisors to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretary would be in close talks with the Queen's Private Secretary.
I think they'll be aware. In a similar way to the Palace was aware of Liz Truss's speech before she gave it yesterday. But there isn't the consultation in the terms of... She would have no input into the language, but she would be aware and across.
He's also heading out, isn't he, on a tour of the United Kingdom, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland as well in the coming days.
But
that's
also,
part of it.
Prince William and Kate were due to be travelling later this month to America,
yes,
were they not? There's lots of talk about they were the new, you know, the new Hollywood couple in the sense of the royals. I'm wondering whether that trip will go ahead.
Well, there won't be any royal engagements of that nature until after the period of royal mourning is over, which, as we've had announced, is 7 days.
Can I just throw this in
funeral.
about a woman who I'm a massive fan of, which is the Duchess of Cambridge. She was criticised massively this morning on social media for staying behind and not...
With the children?
She stayed with her children who started a new school,
but you
and
see,
I thought that
that's
was
what the whole
marvellous.
thing about you're shouted at if you do and shouted at if you don't. I mean, it's their first day at school. And for the little one, it's going to a big boys' school now, and she wanted to be there for them. It's a very, very important day. And it doesn't mean anything about her feelings about the Queen, because we know that they were very, very bonded.
I really object to people who are not members of a family telling a family how they should behave in terms of showing their grief and who chooses to go. Those families make those decisions themselves. And I do think it's really important to remember, though, the Queen has been, as we've talked about it so many times, the backdrop of our lives, the most famous woman in the world. She's our constitutional monarch. She's our head of state.
Our mother.
But the crucial thing is, you know, she has all those roles for us, and we feel we know her like she's a member of our family. She is actually a member of this family. She is a mother. She is a grandmother. She's a great-grandmother. And I really do think people who claim to be royalists, who claim to love the Queen and the royal family, who then are criticising members of that family about whether they are with their children or with their husband on that day, I think they're certainly not monarchists.
And you can't rush out, can you? You can't just rush out and leave them just before they're on their way out on their first day at school.
It was her immediate family around her. It was her
I think that's right. But I also think, looking at the British public, as you said, which is why I was saying my piece about the flowers, I think the British public need to be able to mourn, and I think the British public need to be able to deal with this news and how they move forward and all the changes that are going to happen over the next few weeks in the right way. I'm going to put you all on the spot. What was your tribute? What has this done for you, Kate, when you heard the news? Not as a reporter, as a woman. What did you think? Did you feel upset? Did you feel, I knew that was coming? How did it affect you personally?
It's actually a really good question, because the reaction is quite strange, because your first reaction is as a reporter, because it's the biggest news that any of us will probably ever cover. So the instant reaction was, goodness me. And that was the same for everyone in the press gallery. We all sort of felt the same. And I'm saying this before we knew that of course, the terrible news had really happened. But then the second reaction, my heart started hammering and I got goosebumps. And it's a really strange... There's a lot of people on Twitter, on social media, and actually members of my friends and family saying, I didn't think I would react this way.
Absolutely with you.
I didn't think
Everyone
I would
I know
feel
thought
like
they were knocked
this.
for six. We're going to get your reactions and your tributes
Good
to you
on,
as well,
I like
Sarah and Angela. But at first, of course, she wasn't just our queen. She was actually queen to 15 nations and head of the Commonwealth. And the death of Her Majesty has sparked a truly global reaction. Tributes have poured in from across the Atlantic, with President Biden declaring that Queen Elizabeth II defined an era. Let's take a look.
Queen Elizabeth II died peacefully at her castle in Scotland this afternoon at the age of 96.
Betroffen vom Tod von Queen Elizabeth II.
엘리자베스 2세 영국 여왕의 장례 절차는 앞으로 열흘간 진행됩니다.
Le drapeau de Buckingham Palace qui est en berne. Alors c'est assez incroyable de vivre ça.
Ja, idag så vaknar ju britterna upp till en helt ny verklighet.
Llegó a ser reina esa niña llamada Lilibet por la familia más cercana.
Well, we're joined now live from Canberra by the Sky News Australia reporter Joel Philp, who's just watched the 96 gun salute at Parliament House in Canberra. Good morning, well, good evening to you. And of course, you know, we share the Queen here in the UK with many other countries, including Australia. Tell us a little bit about the reaction there, not just from the public, but politically as well.
Well, you might be able to see behind me, there's actually Australians who've come here to Parliament House to sign the condolence book to express their sympathies to the palace. Right from the other side of the world, there was that 96 gun salute where hundreds of people were here at Parliament House pointing their mobile phones at the guns, completely silent as those loud gunshots echoed out. And then beyond that, of course, we've had a trickle of people throughout the day. The formalities are going to really kick up in the coming days here, and Australians, people like the former Prime Minister, dignitaries are all making their voices heard, speaking about the moments they may have, memories they may have of important moments in the Queen's lives, or when they may have interacted with the Queen themselves, thinking about what it means for her, what she inspired them to do. And indeed, over the other side of the world, it certainly captured the attention of people and reminded them of Australia's past and our connections to the UK.
Joel, thank you for joining us. It's interesting your last sentence reminded the Australian people of the Queen and her importance. And of course we've talked about it this morning on the show, certain places, you know, want to move on, Commonwealth countries. Do you think today's news and the reaction of the Australian people will have surprised many? Do you think it will have hardened that view, or do you think it will have shown people that there's more support for the British monarchy?
Well, I think at this stage it's simply too early to tell, because this is a moment many Australians are saying that is about paying respect and thinking about what a woman the late Queen was, what she represented. So there's really been only one politician, which is the Greens leader here, Adam Band, who took to Twitter today to say that now is the time for Australia to move on and consider a republic. But broadly speaking, many people said that that was not the moment to be considering such a thing. Of course, what we have next is an incredible amount of formalities in which we'll see the Prime Minister and the Governor-General, the representative of the monarchy here in Australia, heading across to the UK to attend the funeral service, and after that we'll have our own National Day of Mourning here. It'll be a period of time in which Australians get a good understanding of how some of these leaders of our country engage with the world and what it means for them to be able to take part in these events too.
Joel Philp from Sky Australia, thank you very much indeed. And of course your Prime Minister and dignitaries will be welcome at the funeral, but not that man from the Green Party. 10 to 10, the panel are still here. We're going to head towards the end. Tom Newton-Dunn is here from 10 o'clock. Just want to use the next few minutes to ask you all what you imagine the next few days and weeks will mean for people watching this. We've talked about protocol, we've talked about tributes. The average man and woman on the street who are battling that cost of living crisis and are in mourning. What does it mean for them, do you think, Angela?
I think a small proportion will say, well, thank goodness that's over, because there's just been so much of it, I want to move on. But I think the majority of people will feel more increasingly sad, because first you get the shock and then it really settles inside you, and you feel very differently about life and people you know, and the royal family, which in a way is an extension of our own families. And I think people will feel very quiet and recognise her for all the work she's done with no criticism whatsoever. That we were so lucky to have a monarch like that for so long.
Sarah Houston, I mean, again, as you say, we talked about all the protocol and timetables, but people will be on their own timetable in terms of their grief. And there'll be people who will be, I mean, I think like Kate and I were both talking about, quite surprised by how shocking this news is. And
that shows you what she meant, though.
And how much people will, so many people, millions, will want to show their respects.
We've talked about the Queen being a constant and representing continuity, and that is what the monarchy does. The crown passes simultaneously from one to another, and yet for us it is a huge change. And I think there will be a feeling of people feeling very unsettled.
Confusion, in a way.
Confusion. The Queen, if you think, our mooring, our safe harbour for people. She was the rock, as Liz Truss described her, a sort of anchor. And when that is removed, and we're not sure what the next era looks like yet.
I think that's really good, because one of the big criticisms recently politically has been we sort of drifted across the summer, Kate, didn't we, without this visible government while this leadership campaign took place. I think the best way that I could sum her up is, and I said this yesterday to somebody, I'm 57, I grew up and I had 3 constants from the first day I was born, my mum, my dad and the Queen. And yesterday I lost the 3rd and final one, and that's I'm not saying, what I'm saying is that's a really big, I've only ever known the Queen. I'm thinking, well, how's it going to work with a king? What are the stamps going to look like? What's he going to... She was always there.
Can I say that you could see that with 2 of her talks to us. One was when Diana died, and one was in the pandemic. And she spoke, every word helped us get over those things. I remember being very distressed about the pandemic, and I listened to her, as did 25 million other people. And what she said, we will get better, we will overcome it, we will be friends, we will meet again. And, you know, it made me cry.
I think all of us.
It's reassurance. That's what we need to hear.
I mean, these are days of shifting sands. We've gone through, we had an economic crash, we've gone through all the battles and the tearing apart of the country over Brexit, we've had a pandemic, we've got a war, we've got an energy crisis. There's an awful lot that people have been through. She has been a constant throughout this. She's now gone. That's going to put a lot more responsibility on the government and politicians to provide that stability.
It does, but it also gives both of them an opportunity to move the country forward into something new. And that's maybe...
To reset.
That's maybe quite hard to talk about for some people. Maybe it's too soon. But that will be a conversation that will be had over the course of the next couple of weeks.
I think you're absolutely spot on, Kate, because I think that has to happen. We have a new Prime Minister, and... Of course, out of respect and dignity for a lifetime of service, we should quite rightly allow people to mourn, and we should quite rightly pay tribute and show our respect to a woman who gave us all a lot. But, that's gone. But the truth of the matter is, the world has changed. We have a king on his way from Balmoral to London today. My point to you two was, I sort of think, well, what's going to happen? Is he going to tell us everything's going to be all right? It's a bit... That's what I mean.
Well, he won't have the same feeling because he's not female, is he? I mean, I think men don't have that same compassion. Yes, they can be compassionate, but they can't have the same looking after.
As well, that we think
nurturing.
If we think of our 3 greatest monarchs, if you think back to your history lessons, your O-levels, like we were old enough to do with GCSEs, when you covered a monarch's period, it was always, wasn't it? It was Elizabeth, it was Victoria, and now we have the 2nd Elizabethan age. How much do you think it has been important that she has been a woman?
I think it's very important because I think that the royal family was very far away from everybody. And actually the woman, although the Queen, it took her a while because she was quite shy and she also came up in an Edwardian world, actually is more compassionate and more open. And I think that Camilla and I think Catherine have helped the King and Prince William to actually also open up. There's not such a big gap between men and women now in being compassionate and close to all sorts of people.
Angela,
On
thank
that,
you.
one of those photographs, the images of Prince Charles, King Charles III as he is now, with little Louis on his lap during the Jubilee.
Oh, yes.
Showed us a very different side, and I think that was very important in
And we
his
wouldn't
image.
have seen an image like that 20, 30 years ago.
They
would
let
we?
him run there. He was determined, and you could see how much each of them loved each other.
There's a
immediately.
normality, I think, in the last few years. We talked earlier about how the Queen has become more open in the last 3 years before her death. The monarchy had to adapt and it had to change, because if it didn't, and it doesn't, it won't survive.
And it always has been able to do that. We think it's reinvented itself again and again. We often think of the modern crises, don't we, Kate? The annus horribilis after Diana and Charles first split up, and Windsor Castle fire. But actually, there have been crises, the abdication crisis, and many others over the centuries. And this is an institution that has been able to adapt to survive, and it will do so again.
It certainly needs to adapt. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you for one line to finish about today, Angela.
I hope she rests in peace.
I agree. I think we would all agree. Sarah, thank you so much for this morning, by the way.
Thank you. It's overwhelming, I think.
Kate?
I would agree for a lot of people. I think they feel like you. They don't quite know how to...
I was really interested in what you and Julia said, just to finish, because I think that is a really honest response, because, as you said, touching on it, there will be people who are very supportive of the monarchy, those who perhaps feel it's outdated and should change. But I think it's really interesting that you and Kate would admit that you didn't think you would feel the way you did feel.
I was really, really choked up, and I knew the news was coming.
I knew I would feel like
absolutely.
that. Thank you so much for joining us for our extended coverage on this historic day as our nation mourns the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
And we at talkTV will continue to bring you all the latest updates as our new King, Charles III, will address the nation later today.
We'll hand you now to Tom Newton-Dunn, who will lead our coverage for the rest of the morning. But first, here are the latest news headlines from our news team in London.